Welcome to Haunting Whispers. Tonight, as the rain falls softly, we'll share some true scary stories to help you relax and fall asleep. And comment, where are you watching from and the time you are watching this video. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. I saw my neighbor get murdered through my window. I was pacing around my bedroom that night, restless and unable to sleep. Every creak in the old house made me glance over my shoulder, and every shadow seemed to stretch a little longer than usual. Maybe it was just nerves. Maybe it was just another one of those nights where your imagination runs wild and everything feels wrong. I couldn't shake the unease gnawing at me, so I kept moving until a scream tore through the silence. It was sharp and desperate, a sound that made my skin prickle and my blood run cold. I froze, straining to hear, my heart hammering against my chest. Was it my imagination? A figment of my anxiety playing tricks on me? Then I heard it again, a raw, agonizing scream followed by the unmistakable sounds of someone struggling. Something inside me tightened. My feet felt like they were stuck in quicksand. But somehow, I made my way to the window, every step heavy with dread. What I saw made my stomach lurch. There, in the dim glow of a street lamp, my neighbor was thrashing on the ground, blood pooling beneath him. A man stood over him, his face hidden in shadow, but I could see the glint of steel in his hand as he drove it down again and again. My neighbor's voice broke with each stab, his shouts growing weaker, fading into pitiful whimpers. And the man, he was smiling, lips curled back in a grotesque grin. He was enjoying it, every single second. I wanted to scream, to shout, to do something, but I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear, watching in helpless horror as my neighbor's life was taken from him in a brutal, bloody act of violence. I tried to look away, but it was like my eyes were glued to the scene, trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. When it was over, the silence was worse. My neighbor lay lifeless, a crumpled heap on the ground, his blood staining the pavement like spilled ink. The killer straightened up, wiped his blade clean on the body's clothes, and turned. My heart stopped as his gaze drifted up, locking onto my window. Our eyes met. For a second, it felt like time itself froze. A shiver of pure primal terror shot through me as the killer's lips stretched into a slow, deliberate smile. He lifted his weapon, pointing it directly at me like a promise. My breath caught. "You're next." That was all I needed to snap out of my trance. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over myself as I fumbled for my phone. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped it. I dialed 911, pressed call, and nothing. No network. I glanced at the screen in disbelief, and my heart sank. What the hell? Then, just as I was trying again, the lights flickered once, twice, and died, plunging the house into pitch darkness. My breath hitched, the darkness suddenly feeling thick and suffocating. I knew it wasn't just a power outage. I was being isolated, cut off from help. Panicked, I ran to the kitchen and yanked open the drawers, my fingers scrambling for anything I could use to defend myself. I found a knife, small but sharp, my only lifeline. Clutching it tightly, I made another desperate attempt to call the police. Still no network. I swallowed hard, the cold blade trembling in my grip. My mind was racing. What should I do? I ran outside, shouting for help. My voice echoed down the empty street, a pathetic cry swallowed by the oppressive silence. "Somebody, please, help!" There was no answer, no lights flicking on in the neighboring houses. No one came out. No one heard me, or maybe no one wanted to hear me. And then I saw him, standing at the edge of my yard, his silhouette sharp and menacing against the darkness. My breath hitched. He took a step forward, and I stumbled back, raising my knife. "I don't want any trouble," I stammered, trying to sound braver than I felt. "I've got a knife too." But the words were weak. My voice, a pitiful whisper in the face of his calm, confident menace. The killer's grin widened, and he lunged. Fear shot through me, and I turned and ran, sprinting around the side of my house. He followed, footsteps heavy and relentless. I was running on pure adrenaline, legs burning as I darted through the backyard, the darkness swallowing me whole. I turned a corner, heart hammering in my throat, and realized I was trapped. The fence loomed high behind me. The killer closed in, his sword gleaming in the faint moonlight. My back was against the wall, literally. I was cornered, and then I spotted it, a rock. It wasn't much, but it was something. I hurled my knife at him, a desperate move to buy time, and when he dodged, I scooped up the rock and threw it with all my strength. It hit him square in the chest, knocking him back a step. I didn't think. I tackled him, sending us both crashing to the ground. For a second, I thought I had a chance. Then he kicked out, catching me by the ankle as I tried to scramble away. He yanked me down, his blade flashing dangerously close. I kicked blindly, catching him in the face, and somehow I was on my feet again. But he was on his feet too, and there was no time to think, only to act. I spun around, desperate to find an escape route. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. My chest was heaving, sweat and fear mingling in my eyes. The killer stepped forward, almost casually, as if savoring the moment. He swung his blade with terrifying precision, and I barely managed to dodge, feeling the air slice past my face. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. In a desperate move, I lunged at him, trying to push him back, but he was strong, far stronger than I'd imagined. He swatted me aside like I was nothing, and I hit the ground hard. Pain shot up my back, my vision blurring for a moment, but I couldn't give up now. I had to survive. I had to fight. I scrambled to my feet just as he raised his sword for another strike. I braced myself, ready to dodge, but then a flash of headlights. A car turned the corner, its beams cutting through the darkness like a lifeline. Without thinking, I dashed out into the street, waving my arms frantically. "Help! Please help!" I shouted, voice breaking. The car screeched to a halt, barely missing me. I could see the driver's wide-eyed expression of shock as he rolled down the window. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded, but I barely heard him. "Someone's trying to kill me," I blurted out, pointing wildly toward the shadows where the killer lurked. "You have to help me, please." Before I could finish, the killer stepped out of the darkness, calm as ever, the sword hanging loosely at his side. He was watching us, almost amused. The driver's eyes widened in horror. He fumbled with his door handle, stepping out of the car. "Get in! We've gotta—" But it was too late. The killer moved like lightning, lunging at the driver with brutal efficiency. I didn't think, I just reacted. I shoved the driver aside, and the blade that was meant for him sliced through the air inches from my face. I stumbled back, barely catching myself. "Get in the car!" I shouted at the driver, but he didn't move. He was frozen, staring at the killer with a mix of terror and disbelief. And then, somehow, he snapped out of it. He charged at the killer, a move that was as brave as it was foolish. The killer sidestepped easily, sending the driver sprawling to the ground. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I scrambled into the driver's car, slamming the door behind me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. The keys were still in the ignition. I twisted them, the engine roaring to life. My eyes flicked to the side mirror, and I saw the killer looming over the driver, raising his sword for the final blow. "No," I shouted, jerking the car into reverse. Tires screeched as I floored the gas pedal. The car shot backward, and I felt the sickening thud as I hit something, someone. The killer's face twisted in pain as he was thrown to the ground. For a heartbeat, everything was still. Then, before he could get up, I shifted into drive and gunned it, the car lurching forward. The killer tried to move, but the front tires caught him square in the chest, crushing him beneath the car's weight. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I drove until I was sure he wasn't getting back up. The car bounced and jolted as I ran over his body again and again, my vision blurred by tears and adrenaline. Finally, I skidded to a stop, hands still clenched around the steering wheel. The silence was deafening. Slowly, I turned off the engine. The driver was sitting up now, staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. I stepped out of the car, legs trembling beneath me, and looked down at what was left of the killer. He lay twisted and broken on the pavement, his sword lying inches from his outstretched hand. "I killed him," I whispered, the words feeling hollow and unreal. My mind was spinning, struggling to process what had just happened. The driver stumbled to his feet, his gaze shifting between me and the mangled body. "You saved me," he said hoarsely, voice thick with shock. "You saved us both." I shook my head slowly, still staring down at the killer's lifeless form. It didn't feel like a victory. It didn't feel real. I'd just been trying to survive. But now, as I stood there in the aftermath, a chill crept up my spine. Because in the darkness, behind the fear, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. It's now been a couple of weeks since then. I kind of hate everyone in my neighborhood. But that was only the beginning. The real nightmare was yet to come. I think there's something wrong with my reflection. I don't have anyone else to talk to about this. I don't have any friends, family, or even acquaintances. When I ran away with Dan, I thought I was moving towards a better part of my life. I was going to be more grand, more promiscuous, and more exotic. But I can't. I arrived at the house just after dusk. It was smaller than I remembered, hunched beneath a sky the color of ash. The realtor had called it quaint, but now all I saw was decay. The paint, once white, peeled like dead skin, curling back from the wood in long, brittle strips. The windows were clouded with dirt, like they hadn't been touched in years. I wanted peace, solitude. But as I stood there staring at the house, I felt the air grow heavy, pressing in on me. Grief does strange things to your mind, I thought. I hadn't been myself since Dan's accident. His death left a gaping hole inside me, and this place, this forsaken house, was supposed to be a refuge. A place to escape, to grieve in silence. But the longer I looked at it, the more I felt something was wrong. I shook off the feeling, telling myself it was just the exhaustion. I dragged my suitcase inside and shut the door, the echo of the slam too loud in the empty rooms. The house smelled like damp wood and old memories, stale and suffocating. I unpacked slowly, my hands numb, mind drifting. That first night, I slept fitfully, wrapped in Dan's old sweatshirt. The wind outside howled like a wild animal, scratching at the windows. I thought I heard footsteps in the hallway around midnight, slow, deliberate. But when I forced myself out of bed to check, there was nothing. Just silence, thick and oppressive. By morning, I convinced myself it had been a dream. Days bled into each other. I wandered the empty rooms, the floors creaking beneath my weight, each groan sounding like the house's whispering voice. Objects started disappearing. Small things at first. A spoon, a pen, my keys. I brushed it off, telling myself I was just forgetful. Grief does that to you. I'd forget my own name if I didn't say it out loud sometimes. But the mirror, that was harder to ignore. It started with glances, catching the corner of my reflection when I wasn't looking for it. I'd be in the kitchen, washing dishes, and out of the corner of my eye, I'd see something move in the hall mirror. At first, I thought it was just my reflection delayed somehow, but it wasn't. One night, as I passed the mirror, I saw her, me, standing there, staring back. Only she wasn't copying me. I froze, my heart thudding painfully in my chest. My reflection stood still, her face slack, eyes wide and dull. She was waiting, watching. I reached a trembling hand toward the glass, but before I could touch it, she moved. Not a blink, not a shift in weight, just a sudden, violent jerk. Her hand shot up to the glass, slamming against it with a sickening thud. I screamed and stumbled back, but when I looked again, my reflection was normal. A terrified, pale version of myself. I backed away, avoiding the mirror for the rest of the night. Every muscle in my body wound tight, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did, not yet. The next day I started hearing the voice. It whispered, faint at first, almost like a breeze, but then it grew louder, clearer. It was Dan. I was sure of it. His voice, soft and familiar, coming from the walls, the floors, the cracks in the wood. He was calling me, telling me he wasn't gone, that he was trapped here. With me. I wanted to believe it. God, I wanted it so badly. The grief in me ached, tearing at the seams. I spent hours sitting in the dark, listening for him, begging for more. But all I got were whispers, taunting, cruel. The voice turned from gentle to accusing, blaming me for his death, telling me I had abandoned him. You let me die, he hissed through the walls. You should be with me. Come back to me. I tried to shut it out, but it followed me from room to room. The objects that had disappeared started showing up in strange places. On the bed, in the fridge, inside my shoes. Things I didn't even own appeared in the house. An old pocket watch, a child's stuffed bear, a photograph of someone I didn't know. Their eyes scratched out. The mirror was the worst. Every time I passed it, she was there. My reflection. But she wasn't me anymore. Her eyes followed me, tracking my movements. She smiled when I wasn't looking. A cold, mocking grin that stretched too wide. I tried covering the mirror with a sheet, but every time I left the room, the sheet would be on the floor when I returned, the glass gleaming as if nothing had been there at all. By now, I was hardly sleeping. The voice never stopped. My reflection never looked away. Then, last night, it happened. I woke to the sound of glass shattering, heart racing, I sat up in bed, blinking in the dark. The mirror. I knew it before I even stepped into the hallway. I could feel it, like a heartbeat, pulsing in the walls. The mirror was broken, shards scattered across the floor. But in the middle of the glass stood a figure, tall and dark, shifting like a shadow made of flesh. It smiled at me. My reflection? No longer behind the glass, but standing in my home, dripping with something dark and sticky. I tried to scream, but the sound lodged in my throat as she moved closer, her smile splitting her face in two, wide and grotesque. "Come with me," she whispered, her voice like shattered glass. "Come be with him." I ran, but the house twisted around me, the walls groaning as they stretched and warped. I could hear her behind me, her footsteps quick and sharp like the ticking of a clock. Closer, closer. Now I'm here, hiding in the attic, my back pressed against the cold wood. The whispers are louder, Dan's voice mingling with hers, calling me, telling me to give in, to join them. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. The door is creaking open, and the mirror is gone. I think she is too. As one chapter closed, the darkness lingered, whispering of more untold horrors. The scream of the sky. The evening was dark. The black sky was hung low above our Midwestern town. My dad and I had been storm chasing several times together, recording some of the most spectacular lightning strikes a camera has ever seen. We would sit on the front porch when any big storm was coming through with a glass of Buffalo Trace bourbon and our favorite cigars. He liked Romeo and Julieta. I liked anything sweet. That was just a tradition of ours, with that electric feel in the air, with the booming thunder and brightening of the night with the lightning. But as of late, that ritual had been torn to shreds. I just moved out and live over 100 miles away. It was as if the call regarding his hospitalization had come as a bolt from the blue. What appeared to be a minor problem of a vitamin deficiency snowballed into a nightmare, culminating in emergency open heart surgery that kept all of us on edge. He wasn't even 50 yet, and I couldn't stand the thought of losing him. Weeks later, he was home, but recovery was slow. He'd lost a lot of muscle mass and walked with a cane, though he could stroll around the cul-de-sac once or twice a day. He filled his time by watching Blacklist and learning Spanish. When I visited, we fell into our old routine, binge-watching YouTube channels like Brandon Herrera, Demolition Ranch, and Wendigoon. That evening, I looked at the digital clock. It read 7:58 p.m. when we were laughing our heads off, watching videos of explosions and spooky tales. There was a light dancing across the sky as the rumble of distant thunder began. Nothing out of the ordinary at first, but this low rumble grew louder and was a sound that felt off, like it was in the wrong key. I turned and saw my dad was sleeping on the couch, shirtless, with his 11-inch scar across his chest visible. Immediately, a huge wave of sympathy and thanks that he was still alive washed over me. The room was suddenly ablaze with light, as if daytime had shattered the night. I looked out of the window. The sky was black, but from the northeast a ball of fire loomed. My father suddenly sat upright, eyes wide with fear, and shouted, "The sun is on fire!" "What do you mean?" "Of course it's on fire, it's the sun," I asked as I walked to the window. The yellow disk now spread across the darkness, sending forth great bolts of fire and lightning that shrieked across the sky as if the sun were screaming at us. "We gotta get out of here," he shouted, in a growing panic. "Wait, we can't just run out into that," I said, holding his arm tightly. These flares curled beside the house, igniting the parched grass of our yard and bubbling and melting the siding as if it was wax. The heat simply enveloped us. This reminded me of how helpless I really am. My dad was frozen in shock, and instinctively, we raced to the basement, the light of the flares still piercing through curtains of the small basement windows. "Hey, remember that storm we chased with the 90 miles per hour winds in Nebraska?" he said suddenly, desperation in his voice. "We thought we were invincible then." "Yeah, but this is different. This isn't just a storm, Dad," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. For what seemed like hours, we sat in the basement huddled together, the sound of crackling flames and the reverberation of thunder sounding like the devil's personal symphony. "We faced worse, right?" I tried to reassure him, though my own heart was racing with fear. "Worse?" he replied, his eyes darting around the room. "This isn't just worse. This is something else." Time blurred and the firestorm raged on. and we clung to each other, our breaths paced in panicked gasps. I tried to distract my dad by talking about completely mundane things. But again, the heavy heat and the feeling of being wrapped in a fiery tornado pressed in around us. I wish I had been there when you... I started, but he cut me off. Don't. We're together now. That's what counts, he said, his voice shaking yet firm. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the fierce brightness began to dim, and the turmoil outside gradually subsided. The shapes of our neighbors' houses re-emerged. Their familiar outlines reappeared through the boiling haze. A surreal stillness began to set in. First, traces of dawn struggled through the darkness, and all of a sudden, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. We made it. I managed to whisper, my heart swelling in gratitude. We had finally breathed a sigh of relief. I glanced over at that digital clock on the wall, 8:05 p.m. We thought that story was over, but what came next was far worse. Pull my finger. Go on, pull it. I looked up from the book I was reading, to see a middle-aged, fat man with goatee. He had his finger close to me and a huge smile on his face. Come on, pull it! He was wearing a washed-up gray hoodie with the hood covering his baldness. He had sweatpants on and Crocs. Rain was trickling on the ground. Come on, man. Just pull it. I need someone to pull my finger. I knew what he was going to do. He was going to fart. He probably had someone with a camera off in the distance to make some funny videos. Today wasn't the day to play around with me, though. I tucked my book into my backpack and tossed it over my shoulder. This was a beautiful park we were in. I just wanted peace and quiet. Someone needs to pull my finger. Have at it. I took a sip of coffee and finally spoke up. Look, man, I know the gag. You want to fart and have a laugh. It's honestly disgusting that you are choosing to do this. It's my only day off. Someone's got to do it. He let out a chuckle. Okay, well go find someone else then. I'm not in the mood. He stared me up and down a minute. This area of New York wasn't exactly safe. For all I knew, he could have been someone high or just trying to get his YouTube views. Couldn't you just do it? It would help me out? I said no. Back off before I call the cops. I stood up as the big man took a few steps. Fine, party pooper. He turned around and began to walk off. After a few moments of sitting alone, I stood up and began to walk back to my apartment. Lightning boomed through the clouds and it sent shivers up my spine. I was walking through the park when a homeless man approached me. Got any money? I'm awfully hungry. I'm sorry, I don't. I'd be happy to buy you a coffee and sandwich. If you want to follow me to the deli up the road. He stared at me as if I insulted him. Got any money? I'm sorry, no. I continued to walk. It bothered me I'd offer him a meal and he just wanted my money. His voice spoke up. Death is here. Death likes to play games sometimes. I didn't know if it was a threat or if he was high. Drugs have taken over this city. Between that and how expensive it is to even have a small studio apartment like mine, it makes sense why there's so many homeless people here. I sped up my pace because it just felt like I was being followed. I turned my head back and the man sat down on bench and was waiting to ask for money again. Lightning struck again and the rain became heavier. I was getting soaked. In front of me again was the fat man who was up to his tomfoolery. He approached a few teenagers who took shelter under a picnic area. I ran to the area to sit until the rain calmed down. The man looked at me a moment and turned his head to the teenagers. One was sitting there and smoking a cigarette. They were playing on their phones and laughing loudly. The man leaned his arm forward again. Pull my finger. For some reason, a cold chill crept over me. One of the teens laughed, and one pulled up his phone to take a video. Yo, we are in the park, and it's raining cats and dogs. This cat came forward and wants us to pull his finger. Don't ya, man? The man stared with a big smile. He repeated his request. Okay then, I'm going for it. That was the last thing he said. He grabbed the man's finger and froze. His friends chuckled at first and stopped when they seen he wasn't moving. Blood was pouring from his eyes, and what sounded like branches snapping appeared to be his bones breaking. He dropped to the ground. One of the other teens jumped up from the table to check on his friend. Another stood up and tried to tackle the man before his body went completely limp and fell to the ground. The big man was smiling. The teen holding the camera dropped his and grabbed his kneeling friend and dragged at him. They tripped through the wooded area and kept going. One pulled out his phone to call for help. The man turned to me and smiled again. Maybe next time. Lightning struck brightly and he was wearing a black robe. He was a skeleton holding a scythe. I backed up and fell on my butt. Lightning struck brightly again. Standing before me was a skinny old man in a black suit. He was wearing a Boston hat and holding onto a black cane. He pulled out a silver pocket watch and made a clicking noise with his tongue. Well, I must be on my way. I have an appointment to get to. He turned around and let the cane lead him. He stopped and turned his head back to me. By the way, I recommend you quit smoking. He walked towards the path and vanished. I could see sirens through the tree line. I ran back to my apartment. Just when we thought we knew fear, a new terror revealed itself. I worked at a Halloween store that sells cursed costumes. It was around September when I was just looking for a temporary job. Nothing fancy, didn't care what I got. I was still in high school and I just wanted some cash of my own. I applied everywhere I could think of, from grocery stores to arcades. I will admit, though, that I may have purposefully focused on applying to places I felt would be either a breeze to work in or fun. It was getting dark, so on my last job finding trip, I decided to go home and figure it out next weekend. I cut through an abandoned mall to save me time when I came across a Halloween store in the center. During the scary season, it's common for various Halloween stores to open in abandoned areas. But in the middle of an empty, dead mall was just unusual. The store also didn't look anything like the other ones, probably another company trying to get into the competition. I looked up at the deteriorating orange neon sign that read, "The Halloween Hut, 'tis the season to dress your worst." I walked in and was greeted by an employee sitting by the counter. I asked him if by chance they were hiring too, which he said yes. Flash forward to 2 weekends later, I sat at the same counter and was scrolling through my phone when a mom and her 2 kids entered the store. The mother asked where the children's costumes were, and I pointed her to the far left corner. They hurried along as I waited for them to come back. After a few minutes, I remembered that I didn't tell them to not try on the costumes. For some reason, that was the one rule my boss really cared for. I got out of my chair and headed towards them to let them know. And to my horror, I saw the mother lying dead on the floor as a small werewolf was feasting on her corpse. It stopped and turned to face me. Growling, it lunges at me, and I make a break for it. I was nearly out the door until a witch flicked her wand and tossed me back towards the werewolf. The werewolf quickly sinks its teeth into my right shoulder as I let out a scream. I shove it aside and push the witch into a rack of costumes. I rush out the front doors and don't stop running till I get home. I called the cops, but they found no store in that mall, nor traces that there ever was one. My family insists that I was just bitten by a rabid dog, and the shock made me think like this. But I know what happened was real, and not because of the bite mark on my shoulder, but because today, while walking down my usual block, I saw another Halloween hut store appear next to the old movie theater. A dad and her young daughter walked out. The daughter was holding a spider costume in her hand. I hope the dad isn't afraid of giant spiders. From the ashes of one horror, another began to rise. We were trapped in an abandoned suburb. Part 5 for previous story. Watch our previous videos. We went straight down into the basement and began a frantic search for the belongings of the deceased victims, using the flashlights we had left down there before. I was in the main room with the furnace, sorting through stacks of junk. There were definitely items from victims everywhere, things that went unnoticed by us before, like graffiti cans someone must have brought to tag the old buildings, women's bags, wallets, etc. The amount of those types of items down there made my stomach queasy, but I kept searching, the silence cut down by the sounds of things rustling around. "Grace!" I heard Vanessa whisper shout my name from the adjacent room. I hurried through the doorless entryway that led to that area of the basement and shined my flashlight on Vanessa, who was leaning on the wall with her ear against it. "Come listen," she whispered and gestured for me to come near. I drew closer and pressed my ear over the wall, frowning. I didn't hear anything but our quiet, rhythmic breathing, so I gave her a confused look. I heard sounds in the wall. Vanessa looked at me with wide, fearful eyes. We both were thinking the same thing, thinking about how 3 of the 4 children's bodies were found within the wall. "Probably rats," I stupidly said. She gave me a look. "Have you seen one living thing since we've been in this mess?" I didn't say anything. Vanessa looked over at a tall wardrobe standing in the corner, mahogany and draped with cobwebs. She walked over to it and looked inside it. There were dusty coats inside, and she pushed them to one end, jumping as she was startled by her own reflection in a mirror that took up the whole back panel of the wardrobe's interior. "Weird," I noted, shining my flashlight at it. A sound made us turn our heads behind us. An object we disturbed during our search settling in place, maybe. Something dropping or shifting naturally. But when I looked back at the mirror, I saw a glimpse of the upper half of Peter's face peering over my right shoulder, only his eye sockets and brown bangs visible. I screamed and jumped back. "What?" Vanessa asked, shining the flashlight around to see nothing at all. She... I stuttered, my hand on my chest as I looked behind me and backed into the wardrobe. It slightly shook, and the mirror inside jostled out of position, a corner dropping and revealing a black crack. "Wait a second." Vanessa removed the mirror to find a dark hole leading into the wall. My mouth fell open. I grabbed Vanessa's arm as she lifted her leg to go inside. "What are you doing?" "What if it's in the walls?" she whispered, shrugging me off and climbing inside. "Are you coming or what?" I cursed under my breath and followed her, bending low and slipping through the hole to the narrow, crumbly space between drywall. I didn't think the basement could get creepier, but somehow it did. I felt claustrophobic there, and I wanted out immediately, but I knew we needed to leave no stone unturned, so I pressed on, following behind Vanessa. We reached a dead end soon, where the back of the staircase was presumably, and our flashlight beam reflected off something shiny under some light rubble. "Look." Vanessa fell to her knees and pulled bits of wall and wooden beams off of a dark gray backpack. A silver zipper had caught the light. Immediately, she zipped it open and triumphantly pulled out a sachet like the one I'd found earlier. The air was permeated with the smell of decay as soon as she revealed it, but we were too excited to care. "Why am I the designated eye holder?" I griped as she gave it to me. "Come on, let's look for that purse before those things get tired of chasing Yazzie." Vanessa nudged me, and I led us back the way we came. "Where's the hole?" I asked as I looked at the part of the wall where I was sure we had entered. The tunnel stretched on farther than we remembered, and we could hear the sounds of light footsteps as someone we couldn't see ran just up ahead. Despite this, we pressed on, hoping it was the ghost of Peter returning for his eyes. We walked and walked and walked. "Oh God," Vanessa whispered as we realized we were stuck in an infinite loop behind the wall. "This can't be happening." I whimpered. It seemed like a lifetime later when my flashlight beam landed on a figure crouched with his back to us. The red shirt and black hair pointed to it being Peter, and he wept softly into his hands. "Peter," I said softly as Vanessa clutched onto me for dear life. "We have something that belongs to you. Let us go peacefully, and you can have them." I felt a soft breath on the back of my neck and spun around, my heart jumping out my chest. Vanessa screamed. Peter was now behind us, with a grin that was impossibly wide. I looked down at his open hand, where the sachet which I did not remember handing him was now sitting. With that, he was silently pulled by an unseen force back into the darkness, the holes in his face looking at us the entire time. "Thank God," I cried, looking behind me to see that the hole leading out of that dreadful space had appeared again. We hurriedly climbed through the wardrobe and back into the basement. "Grace." Zach's voice tickled my ear. The stagnant basement air was filled with the shrill sounds of Vanessa and I's terror as we burst into a run, not even bothering to look behind us. We beelined for the stairs, Vanessa running faster than me. I was scared that she'd leave me behind like I had left Zach behind. I tried to run faster as she reached the first step before I did, my shoes stomping the floor so hard it shook. Then suddenly, I was under the floor, my body racked with pain, and the sound of wood splintering and giving way covering up Vanessa's screams. I looked up through the hole and saw Zach crouching over me, his pale hand reaching for my face. I thrashed wildly like a caged bird and kicked him away, scrambling deeper into the hole. It was then that I realized it was a crawl space, and there was a small hatch just beyond where one of the kids' bodies was found. I hurtled through it, crawling through the claustrophobic little tunnel caked with dust and webs. It smelled like rot down there, but I hardly noticed as I tried to listen to see if I could hear Zach giving chase. I didn't hear anything, but I looked behind me anyway. I couldn't hear anything because somehow the little blonde ghost was silently scuttling after me in the crawl space instead of Zach. Her mouth hung open, a black void like her eyes. Her dirty, cracked and bloody fingernails scraped the floor as she went. Her movements looked unnatural, like she was in sped-up footage, and my heart lurched in my ribcage. I crawled faster, hyperventilating and feeling my mind cloud with overwhelming fear. Up ahead, I spotted a dead end, but just in front of it was a hole. I allowed myself to drop through, and I felt the crisp grass and something else cushion my fall. I rolled over on my back and looked to my side to see a faded, old pink clutch purse with a zipper and a bit of what looked like old blood smeared on it. I grabbed it and zipped it open as a stark white arm, followed by a curtain of blonde hair, slipped through the hole. A revolting stench unleashed into my nose as I pulled out another sachet and threw it at the wraith, clawing her way towards me. Sarah, on all fours, stopped, stared at it, then snatched the sachet and crawled backwards lightning fast until she disappeared into nothingness. The tension in my body diminished as I was alleviated of her presence. As I crawled from under the house, I wondered briefly about the crawl space, which very clearly seemed like a discreet escape route for a man who knew he was doing something terribly illegal, a way he could leave without being caught, if the authorities came to his door. But if he had gone through such lengths, why did he end up killing himself and revealing his crimes? This didn't occupy my thoughts for too long, as I looked out at the empty street and wondered where Vanessa was. Did she escape Zach? If so, where did she go? As if on cue, a distant scream echoed into the night, and my head snapped towards the tree line behind the house on the left, which we had never explored. Realizing this was Vanessa's voice, I darted towards where I heard it, hoping beyond all hope that I could make it in time. I was not going to let her die like I had done to Zach. I weaved around the trees, my lungs on fire and my legs growing tired. "Vanessa," I called. "Where are you?" I spotted platinum blonde hair in the distance and sped up, approaching Vanessa, who was standing still and staring upward. I crashed into her, hugging her in relief that she seemed fine. I found Sarah's eyes and gave them to her. I told her breathlessly, "We just have one last pair left." I pulled back and looked at her shell-shocked face. Finally, I followed her gaze and looked up, pointing my flashlight skyward. The eyeless corpse of what I recognized to be Lisa Waller dangled by a noose from a tree branch, cutting through the silence with the steady creaking of the rope. She was a white woman with brown hair, a tank top, shorts, and sneakers, who seemed to be in her mid-20s to early 30s. I looked around, sweat falling into my eyes as I took in the sight of dozens of corpses hanging from the trees, all eyeless and all with nooses around their necks. Not only that, but there was a graveyard of cars, just sitting there in the spacious gaps between the trees. I don't understand. I stuttered, recognizing the corpse of Rachel, who had killed Lisa in wraith form on video, hanging not too far away. "It's like how the Eye Ripper died," Vanessa whispered, facing me with eyes glossy with tears. "That's why we didn't see Bryce's corpse or Zach's. They end up hanging the bodies to mimic his death." "But why?" I blinked, at a loss. Vanessa shrugged. Cluelessly, I decided to tell her about the crawl space. The purse was under the house. When I fell through the floor, I went through the crawl space, and there was a hole leading under there. I don't know why that sicko put it down there, but honestly, I'm more confused about why he went through the trouble of making an escape plan if he was just going to end up killing himself anyway. Maybe, Vanessa considered. Maybe the killer didn't hang himself after all. Maybe he was their first victim. The curse could have started when they haunted him and pulled his eyes out, then hung his body. I mean, even the cops thought it was far-fetched for a man to hang himself after gouging his own eyes out, but they said there was no sign of foul play. So does that mean his ghost is around here somewhere? The thought was chilling to me. I don't know. Vanessa looked at me, the same apprehension on her face. Hey, that video we watched earlier. Lisa said William's parents were part of the occult, and that's why she thinks he's responsible. Witches or something, I guess. When he killed William last, the curse started. We don't even know how to find his eyes. I felt hopeless all of a sudden. He didn't go missing with something like the others did. Wait a minute. Vanessa looked thoughtful. That woman said that he had actually escaped from the basement at one point, but the killer chased him down and got him. I wonder if it was these woods, and that's why they put the bodies up here. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Look, what are you getting at? I think William's eyes are out here, Vanessa replied. I just have this feeling. Are you serious? That'll take forever. I wiped the grime and dust off my glasses. Do you have somewhere to be? I huffed at her sarcastic response. The two of us started to meander, unable to look away from the hanging corpses as we did. I thought I heard a whisper, but when I looked around, I saw nothing. I worried we weren't alone out here. I unclipped my walkie and decided to see if John or Yasmin would answer. Hello? Are you guys alive? There was nothing but static. Vanessa filmed the hanging bodies, and I thought that was distasteful, but remained silent. I heard a twig snap and looked over my shoulder, seeing an arm retract behind a tree. Before I could voice my concerns, Vanessa screamed up ahead. The body of John was hanging, eyes missing and dark skin a ghoulish gray from lack of blood flow. I remember it just like it was yesterday, the feeling of great loss hitting me like a punch to the gut. Aside from Yasmin, he was the nicest to me out of everyone, and every time I try to recall one of his charming smiles or the way he would laugh at his own jokes, the visage of his dead face is smeared all over those memories. I knelt next to Vanessa, who was sobbing in a heap on the ground, and wordlessly pulled her to her feet so we could run from the entity watching us. She didn't even question it as I dragged her along. She just clutched me and wept. Suddenly, both our walkies crackled to life, scaring the crap out of us both. But the fear was replaced with relief as Yasmin's voice came through. Are you all alive still? I'm back, but I can't find anyone. Yas, we're in the woods. I frantically all but yelled into the walkie-talkie as Vanessa went over to retch and dry heave next to a tree. There's bodies hanging everywhere. They're the people who were killed in this place. What the fuck? And, oh God, John is up there too. My voice shook as I broke the bad news. He's dead. They got him. Yasmin cursed up a storm over the walkie, covering her grief with anger, and I interrupted her, knowing we had little time to spare. We only have one last kid left. Vanessa thinks his eyes are out here, but you need to come help us look. We're in the woods behind that house you were looking at earlier. It was maybe 10 minutes before she found us, during which Vanessa and I had hid in a large tree hollow as we heard footsteps crushing sticks and leaves all around us. Something, was following us and being eerily stealthy about it, and it could have been more than one. We were shivering within the hole in the rotting bark when we heard her call out, and we crawled out to meet her. Why were you hiding? Yasmin looked pale and exhausted as she regarded us. I had no doubt we looked similar. There's things all around here. They've been following us, Vanessa whispered, putting a finger to her lips. They haven't tried attacking yet, which is somehow creepier than if they did, I added as I glanced around us in paranoia. But let's not wait until they do. Let's find this kid's eyes so we can leave this horrible fucking place behind. What's that? Yasmin pointed to the tree hollow where we had hid. The opening began at the ground, looking almost like a semicircle door to some elfin house. She pointed at something we didn't notice in our panic to find a hiding place from our pursuers, something that was sticking out of the ground a bit. It was white and thin. I bent down and inspected it, realizing it was a shoelace. I tugged it and a moss-covered shoe broke loose from a pile of fallen leaves, acorn shells, twigs, and dirt. Vanessa gasped from behind me. It's William's. His body was recovered from the basement, missing his shoe. You told me he didn't go missing with anything. I frowned. No, Grace. He didn't go missing without a shoe, she corrected me irritably. He was found dead without it. The pieces of the puzzle connected in my head. That woman on the video, she said he escaped the basement, ran into the woods, but ultimately got found and caught by the killer. I looked in the shoe to be sure the sachet wasn't inside, And to my great disappointment, it wasn't. Yeah, Vanessa nodded. It's a part of the story that's sort of hard to find, but I remember listening to a podcast, and they said he actually admitted that in his letter. The note he left behind was really long and full of weird, perverted stuff. Not all of it was released. He hid in here, I revealed, gesturing to the tree hollow after dropping the shoe. And he was caught, and in the struggle, his shoe fell off. Vanessa started filming again, pointing the camera at the tree. This is almost out of battery, but I need to get this shot. Hey, what's that? Yasmin and I followed her gaze. She had the camera pointing upwards. I squinted my eyes, not seeing anything. Huh? Look at that branch, under the one with the old bird's nest, Vanessa instructed, pointing with her free hand. Finally, my eyes landed on it, a sachet, tied by the little rope holding it close to a twig sticking out of the branch. It's his eyes, I cried. He put them in the tree. The depravity of the eye ripper astounded me. The tree reminded him of where he had found the little boy. The chase must have been a rush for him, aside from the fear of being caught. I imagined the sick pleasure he could have felt once he caught and killed him. Using the tree as his own twisted memorial, twisted him up a part of the boy's remains to remind himself of his gruesome crime. Hold this. Vanessa shoved the camcorder in my hands and immediately got to work scaling the oak like an overgrown monkey. Yasmin and I watched her, antsy. Woof woof woof. A little snicker caught our attention and we looked behind us. I immediately recognized Rachel's eyeless face, cracked by a wicked red-painted smile that slashed across her cheeks like a scar as she peeked around a tree. Vanessa! Hurry! I screamed. She looked down at the apparition slowly advancing on us and scrambled towards the hanging sachet. I grabbed Yasmin's arm and pulled her back, but stopped in my tracks when I heard footsteps approaching from behind. I turned, and there was an unfamiliar man, the spirit of another eyeless victim. Then came another, emerging from the trees, and another, a young teenage boy, and another, a woman in a police uniform. They wore different expressions, some of their expressions vacant, some smiling dementedly, some frozen in a silent scream, some twisted into a picture of perpetual misery with bloody tears and an upside-down smile that lengthened their jaw more than humanly possible. Go back to the house and lock the door, Vanessa yelled, her fingers outstretched towards the sachet as she straddled a branch. I'll meet you there. The palm of Yasmin and I's hand seemed glued together with sweat as we ran in between the eyeless wraiths, back towards where we could see that street in the distance. They extended their arms towards us, fingers grasping for our eyes. An unsettling chorus of pained moans, deranged laughter, unintelligible whispers, and furious yelling erupted all around us from the entities as we narrowly escaped with our lives. The next account of this experience will be the last one, and unfortunately, it'll get worse before it gets better. The tale ended, but the echoes of dread led us into the next nightmare. There is something knocking on my window. It's 1:23 a.m., and someone or something is knocking on my window. That shouldn't be possible. I'm on the second story, far above the ground. I've already gone through every explanation I can think of. No bugs, no animals, no branches, not even loose siding that could be rattling. The nearest tree isn't close enough, yet the sound persists, a hurried and deliberate tapping, like someone standing right outside. No one is there. Nothing is there. At first, I thought it might be my imagination. You know how sometimes you hear things late at night that aren't really there? But this, I know what I'm hearing. It's steady, not the 3 slow knocks of a horror movie. It's fast and persistent, then silence. A minute passes, and I hear it again. I'm sitting here, trying not to think too much about it. I know there's no way anyone could be out there, not this high up. But the knocking isn't stopping, it's deliberate. Then, from the other side of the room, more knocking. It's moved. The opposite window now. Wait, it hasn't moved. It's just more knocking, like the windows are having a conversation back and forth. It's relentless. The sound echoes in the quiet of my room. I get up and pull back the curtain on the opposite window, peering out into the dark. Nothing. Just the empty space between my window and the ground. But as I'm about to let the curtain fall, I hear it again. It's coming from the other side of the room. I spin around, and wouldn't you know it, another flurry of fast knocks against the glass. I can't believe it. I dash back to bed, throw the covers over my head, like that would protect me from whatever this is, and turn on a How to Better Your Life podcast, hoping it will drown out the noise. Instead, it seems to amplify it. Every time I try to focus on the podcast, the knocks break through, getting louder and louder. I can hear it clearly, even with the volume cranked up. I must be going crazy. Schizophrenia usually shows up in your early 20s, right? That checks out. I'm 23, but I don't have any family history of it. It's not like I see Barney in a tutu dancing in the corner of my room, so I have no idea. Could it be the antidepressants? Did I skip a dose? Could that even make you hallucinate? Wait, do sounds even count as hallucinations? What if it's someone messing with me? But how could they knock so high up without me seeing them? Maybe they're throwing stones, but how are they throwing them that fast? It makes no sense. I glance at my phone, half expecting a text or call, maybe a joke from a friend, but nothing. I let the podcast continue, but again, the host's voice is drowned out by the knocking. I shove my earbuds in, trying to tune out the sound, but it's no use. It only gets louder. It feels almost taunting. Then, just when I think I've finally blocked it out, there's a pause, a heavy silence hanging in the air. For a moment, I feel relieved. Maybe it's over, but I literally couldn't take the suspense anymore. I throw back the covers, my feet hitting the cold floor. I walk toward the window, half expecting to find a prankster on the other side, someone with a twisted sense of humor. I reach for the curtain and pull it back, bracing myself for whatever I might find. But still, nothing. Just darkness. Just silence. So here I am, back in bed, writing this post because what the hell? Does anyone have any ideas? Thanks. We escaped that nightmare, but the shadows knew there was more to come. The Rave Party from Hell, Part 1. The first thing I noticed was the cold on the left side of my face, my head still pounding with the music from the night before. I started to open my eyes, but was quickly blinded by bright white light. I squinted, barely able to make out the gray floor I was laying on. I slowly stood up as my eyes adjusted to the light. I was dizzy, my ears ringing. This was unlike any hangover I had ever experienced. I opened my eyes again, now more adjusted to the light. Panic took me as I saw the metal bars in front of me. What had I done? When did I get arrested? The more I looked around, though, the more I realized it wasn't a jail cell. The metal bars formed around me. It was a cage. I grasped at hope as I violently shook the bars. Nothing. It's useless, a voice to my right said. Where the fuck are we? I yelled. Don't know. The man calmly sat down. But we're not getting out. I looked around the room. More cages lined the edges of the room. Most were empty. There were only one or two that were occupied by lifeless bodies. All I could think to do was yell. Fear and adrenaline took over as I grabbed the cage again, trying any way I can to get out. It was useless, though. The cage didn't budge. I told you, the man said. Going nowhere. Wait, you're American too? No shit, Sherlock. Suddenly, it all came back. The flight, landing in Paris, the hotel, and then the party. The loud music, the laser lights, dancing. It was a damn rave. But none of this made sense. How did I end up here? I turned to the man next to me. How did we get here? I asked. I don't know. No one seems to know. There are others? I asked. There were. He pointed to the empty cage. They're gone now. His expression became empty. Where? Where did they go? I approached the bars closest to his cage. They come get them. Take them away. Who? I asked, now frustrated. I had many questions. I don't know who they are. They were long red robes. Their hoods cover their faces. His expression turned to fear. They take us, one at a time, and we don't come back. He paused. Tell me what the last thing you remember is. I paused. I struggled to recall. The whole night was a blur. The bouncer, the music, the dancing. It all blended together. I don't know. Dancing in the crowd, I think. Why? Same here. That's the last thing we all remember. Dancing, drinking, being in that fucking club. Suddenly there was a loud clang. Across the room, a door began to open. A figure in a red robe entered, just as the man said. The shadow from his hood covered his face. Don't look at them, the man whispered. I dropped my gaze to the floor, as he had done. I stood still, as if not moving would make the figure not see me. In peripheral, I saw the hooded figure approach the other man. From under his robe, he pulled out a crooked dagger with the black crow emblem on the blade. He ran the knife along the cage bars, taunting him. The figure looked at me, locking my gaze. Under the hood, I could see piercing red eyes. I wanted to look away. I tried to look away, but I couldn't. "I told you not to look at them," the other man yelled. The hood figure pulled the knife back and came towards my cage. I was now frozen in fear. The figure made his way to the door of my cage, opened the door, and stepped in. As he did, I stumbled back, pressing my back to the cage. He continued to look down. He reined the knife up my chest, past my neck, and rested it under my chin. He lifted, causing me to lift my chin. We locked eyes again, and then everything went black. One door closed behind us, but a darker path stretched ahead. Sharky, the tooth-brushing terror. In the coastal town of Sandy Shores, where the salty air clung to the skin and the waves whispered secrets that made grown men shudder, a dark legend spread like a disease among the children. They spoke of Sharky, a superhero whose toothy grin gleamed like a lighthouse beacon, illuminating the depths of the sea. But beneath the surface, that smile concealed something far more sinister, a creature that thrived on fear and darkness. Years ago, a monstrous shark had claimed a little girl during a family picnic. It was a brutal summer day when her laughter was drowned by the chaos of splashing waves and blood-soaked sand. The town had been quick to forget the horror, brushing it under the rug, but the scars ran deep. And so Sharky was born, not from heroism, but from a desperate need to quell the nightmares that lingered beneath the waves. As the tale of Sharky grew, the children initially embraced him as a quirky guardian of oral hygiene. "Brush twice a day, or Sharky will come for your teeth," they teased, giggling at their own foolishness. But as summer turned into fall, their laughter twisted into screams. One by one, children began to disappear, swallowed by the shadows that loomed over Sandy Shores. The first signs were innocuous enough. Toothbrushes missing from bathroom sinks, replaced by overly polished bristles that sparkled unnaturally. Parents dismissed their children's concerns, chalking it up to misplaced items. But fear began to creep into the hearts of the young ones as they found notes written in slick, glistening ink, promising a visit from Sharky if they didn't brush well enough. "Brush thoroughly, or I'll take your teeth," the notes warned, adorned with a crude drawing of a smiling shark. As night fell, a chilling fog rolled in from the sea, wrapping the town in an otherworldly embrace. Children would gather on the beach, daring each other to stay out later, each too terrified to be the first to leave. But it was during one of those moonlit nights that they witnessed the horror of Sharky. Emerging from the waves, he was not just a creature of legend, but a grotesque amalgamation of shark and man, his skin slick and glistening, eyes dark pools of malice. "Did you brush today?" he growled, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the very ground they stood upon. The children froze, paralyzed by fear, as Sharky brandished a toothbrush that glimmered like a weapon, its bristles stained red. "Your teeth are my trophies, and you've been very naughty." One night, a group of brave children, hearts pounding in their chests, ventured to confront the beast. Armed with nothing but crude clubs and flashlights, they marched down to the shore, their minds racing with thoughts of valor. As they reached the water's edge, Sharky broke through the waves, revealing a monstrous grin that stretched too wide to be human. "Join me, or your teeth will join the rest," he snarled, and suddenly, the night was filled with the anguished cries of those who had vanished before them, trapped in the depths, their mouths filled with echoes of his warning. The children realized too late that the stories were not mere tales. They were a warning. They turned to flee, but the sand felt like quicksand beneath their feet. Sharky lunged, and in a flash, the beach was silent once more. In Sandy Shores, the sun continued to rise and set, but the laughter of children faded into whispers, tales of a tooth-brushing terror waiting just beneath the waves. Each night, parents would hear scratching at their doors, and the soft sound of brushing echoing through the darkness, a chilling reminder that Sharky was always watching, always waiting for his next prize. The children of the town, their teeth forever claimed, became part of Sharky's ghastly collection, trapped in a cycle of fear that turned smiles into screams. That was just one horror among many, and now something new awaited in the darkness. I'm not the monster. The first person I killed was by accident. No, truly. I didn't mean to end his life, but only to hurt him as much as he had hurt me. Ashton was a bully to the 10th degree, and while he definitely deserved the death he received, it was not my intention. The ex of my lover who still lived with her. The ex of my lover who would abuse her. The ex of my lover who did deserve death. He confronted me in the hallway of Tiffany's while she was away. He blocked my exit and charged at me, so if anything, it was self-defense. It would absolutely hold up in court. The judge would clearly see my side of the story and agree. I only meant to knock him unconscious, but I couldn't stop. The way his skull smashed into the knob felt so good every time I thrusted it. The softening of his cranial dent from each time it was forced, the blood on my hands, the small splatters on my face, I must admit it felt euphoric. No more can this cretinous monster affect others' lives. His vileness smothered out like a light, gone. The world was better off than it was 5 minutes before, while he was stealing the oxygen from others more deserving. But I was clearly an amateur then. I left the body, and Tiffany found it. Oh, how I'm sure she screamed. I can only imagine the horror she must have felt as he laid twitching by his bedroom door in his pile of blood. I wish I could have seen it. I wish I could have been there to comfort her, to explain to her why it was for the best, why she was now free from his oppression and torment he forced onto her daily life. But sadly, I could not. I had to flee. The police wouldn't understand in that moment. They never could. Worthless pigs. My second kill was much more prepared and professional, as it was one I had planned for a majority of my life. Sheila was my 5th grade teacher, and her demise was her own doing. As a young boy who had just moved across the country for a 3rd time, I was already fighting an uphill battle. But Sheila made my 5th year a war. She regularly encouraged the other children to bully me. She made me a target, not just for her, but for my classmates. And I will always remember the day when she stood up to ask the class why I hadn't finished my homework the night before. "Because he's lazy," one girl said. "Because he was probably watching TV instead," said another. I was always told that teachers went into the profession to make a difference in their students' lives. But foolish me thought it was for the better. Sheila went into the profession to make children's lives like mine worse. This is the instance in my life where I changed from a happy child to a sinister one. It is her fault for why I am the way I am. 30 years of planning, and I finally got the last laugh. She was already old, well past her late 40s when I had her as a teacher. Now she is frail. I spent a good time studying her and her habits, her living alone as I assumed her husband had passed and her grown children no longer lived with her. First time I saw her in decades was when she was walking out to her car. She had gray hair now, and she walked much slower, but she still carried that smugness around her, the "I'm better than you" attitude, and it was confirmed when I ran into her at the market. She was reaching for a jar on a higher shelf, and me, being the kind person that I am, reached for it and gave it to her. Bitch had the audacity to say, if I needed help, I would have asked. Thank you, Sheila, for giving me the confirmation that you are still the person you were when I was young. I was following her for several weeks in an RV I had purchased in cash to escape any sort of trail. I was able to camp down the street at a truck stop, and luckily it was not that far from her home. She went to church 2 times a week, ironic, and would go to evening worship on Wednesdays. This is when I decided to perform. I waited until dark, and she pulled out of the driveway before I hopped her fence into her backyard. Luckily, the back door from the patio was unlocked. If you only saw the house without meeting the woman, you would think she was a kind person. Lovely pictures of her adult children and what I could assume were her grandchildren on the walls. An older photograph of her young in a wedding gown dancing with who I could assume was her groom. But I would not be fooled by this facade of kindness. If anything, it made me more furious. How can someone so vile deserve such things in life? I hid in her coat closet facing the living room where her television was, having the wire I purchased out of state wrapped around my leather gloves. I wear shoe covers, which make me quieter while hiding the soles to leave no evidence. She then comes in. I wait. She takes her time getting settled for the evening before she sits down in her recliner facing the television in the living room, and I can see her easily through the door crack. I wait and I wait. She begins to doze off a bit, and this is when I find it to be the perfect time. I slid out of the closet and do my best to not let it move much to avoid any noise. I carefully creep behind her, and luckily for me, she is too far gone to notice. I wait until a commercial break, as I do not want to interrupt her show. I'm not that cruel, not as cruel as her. And it was an Alzheimer's medication that came on. I remember it vividly. This is when I wrapped the wire around her throat and tightened. The noises she made, the kicks she kicked, the gasping for air. It was what I had dreamt my entire life. The rush of the high of finally relinquishing the world of a demon. I had so much joy I couldn't help but smile. Until she looked up at me. I could see her eyes turning red from the blood vessels bursting, her face turned blue, and for a second I eased my grip. A part of me felt sorry for the old woman until I thought of all that she did to me. The anger then took over, and I wrapped even tighter than before. I kept asking her if she remembered me. If she remembered who I was and if she knew why I was doing this. I'm sure 100 different past students she tortured in her life ran through her mind. It didn't matter if she knew who I was. All that mattered is she was gone. She was feeling all the pain she has caused, and she was finally paying for her sins, and her absolvement was complete when her legs quit kicking. It was like a weight off my shoulders. This evil person was gone. Gone and never to be seen again. I stood there with happiness in my face, knowing I had done the right thing. But it was ended shortly when I heard a car pull into the driveway outside of the house. I left in a hurry, sprinted as fast as I could out of the house, slamming the back door and over the same fence I climbed before. I was only a few blocks away when I heard the screams. Whose screams they were, I do not know. But how I wish I could have been there to comfort them. To tell them what had happened was righteous and was done out of necessity for the safety of children she would teach in the future. I would tell them all of the horrible things she had done to me and to other children, and they would understand. They would understand that what laid in that living room was not a person, but a monster. What seemed like the end of the story was just the beginning of another terrifying chapter. I am the new landlord of a village. Something there wants to kill me. Okay, I think this needs a bit more context. You wouldn't know it if you saw me walk down the street, but my family owns a village. This village is somewhere in Bengal, but I won't tell you where for reasons that will quickly become clear. My ancestors were given the zamindari, or feudal rights, over the settlement by the Pala kings all the way back in the 11th century. Yes, it's been a heck of a long time. What did we do to deserve this honor, you ask? Well, there isn't a simple answer to that. Kings used to give away lands and villages for practically anything back in the day, from marrying the princess to curing the prince of an illness to bringing over the neighboring king's head. I haven't had the time or the inclination to rifle through what little family chronicles have survived to find out which one we did. I live miles away from that place anyway, in Kolkata. My father left the ancestral manor in the care of my grandfather and his brothers and moved away with his family when I was barely learning to open my eyes. Since then, I have only visited Chayagar a total of 5 times. That's the name of the village, by the way. Chayagar. The last time I visited the village, I was 10 years old. My father was still alive then. My memories are dim, given that it was more than a decade ago, but I remember the important details. I remember my grandfather's glowing face as he sunned himself in his recliner, watching me play with the weeds in the courtyard. I remember his hefty walking stick and enjoying the loud clacks it made as he walked around the corridors. I remember Ram Lal, the manservant, chasing me around the backyard to force me into taking a bath. I remember my grandmother's delicious cooking on my tongue. I remember other things too. The pale lady in a white sari smiling at me from the parapet of the boundary wall. The unnaturally tall man whispering to my grandfather in his study, his broad-brimmed hat scraping the ceiling. He had turned briefly to smile at me. His face had nothing on it save the grinning mouth. I remember the shaggy thing I used to play fetch with near the family grove, built like a dog, but not quite. I remember my father sending me back to my room with a harsh noise, old rifle in hand, before joining a small group of villagers with flaming torches and wooden staves at the front gate at midnight. There's something off about Chayagar. I can't find a better way to explain it. It is a normal village, with all the trappings you would expect. Playing children, women with water pots, charming little trees and huts. But alongside that world, there's another world that lives there. A world many of us would rather not acknowledge. That world was somehow centered around us. Each time my father took us there, something was always happening. Villagers filtering in and out to confer with the family, mounds of dusty books and manuscripts lying open on tables, weapons being brought out and maintained. Each of these build-ups would inevitably have a climax, a loud struggle at midnight, gunshots in the forest, a massive ritual bonfire in the atrium, or something similar. I never saw these climaxes. Everyone made sure to give me a wide berth whenever funny business was involved. After everything was over, my father would pack us up and we would be back in Kolkata, none the worse for the wear. The last time we went there, it was different. I was too young to ask questions, but something went wrong. That night, my father returned 3 hours later, his face white as a sheet. He was alone and without his gun. He said nothing. He did nothing. He merely went into a room with my mother and my grandfather and closed the door. 15 minutes later, my mother came to put me to bed as usual. I am pretty sure she said nothing out of the ordinary, but there were streaks of tears running down her face. The next morning, we packed our bags and returned to Kolkata. 2 days later, there was an accident. 30 cars piled up on the road. Only one casualty. Even at the cremation, my mother said nothing. She only cried silently as she handed me the torch and let me burn my father's mangled corpse to ashes. We haven't been back to Chayagar since. In fact, she has actively kept me away from visiting, despite more than 100 letters from my grandparents, old-fashioned people. Apparently, they never could figure the telephone out. Not that I'm complaining. Without the rose-tinted glasses of childhood, it was kind of a shitty place anyway. The land was dry and hard, and the villagers struggled to farm in the best of weather. The water table was deep and stony, and the nearest well was over 2 miles from the manor. The servants had the near-constant duty of running pots of water to the house for cooking and cleaning. I'm pretty sure there still isn't a mobile tower, bank, or post office in the entire block. In hindsight, the only thing that made it worth it was the pure joy on my grandfather's face whenever he saw us. But that can only take you so far. My life in Kolkata is good. I just finished my law degree, and a career in litigation looks to be on track, though my senior still insists that 5,000 rupees is plenty of money to live on for a month. I'm not sure he has purchased anything since the 50s. My mother is running a successful interior decoration business, so that helps with the finances. My father also left behind a decent estate, and for all our neglect, my grandparents do not skimp on sending over the revenue from the property. I dimly knew that I was going to come into the zamindari eventually, given that my father was no longer in the picture, but it was not something I really thought about. In any case, I was planning to pawn the damn place off to the first feudal enthusiast I met with more money than sense. Chayagar did not feature in my top 50 priorities list. Until yesterday. This time, the letter that came did not bear my grandfather's characteristically elegant handwriting on the envelope. It was the harsh, angular script of a lawyer, just in case the starched brown envelope did not make the official nature of the communication clear enough. Apparently, our family has an estate manager. He was writing to tell me that my grandfather was dead. There were no details as to how, just strict business. In accordance with ordinary rules of succession, the zamindari should devolve to one of my uncles, but my grandfather had made his wishes clear. The family customs had to be followed. The land and the village must pass to his firstborn son, my father, and through him to his firstborn son, me. He had also insisted that I come to the village immediately and take charge of the manor and the surrounding properties. The estate lawyer would meet me there and hand over some articles he had bequeathed to me. I had sole and absolute ownership over the ancestral house, but he had requested that I allow my grandmother, my uncles, and their families to continue their residence on the premises and take care of their needs. When I showed my mother the letter, I was expecting she would say what was already on my mind. Toss the letter in the bin, surrender the property to some relative, or failing that, the government, and go on with my life in peace. Instead, she sighed, put the letter face down on the table, and asked, "When are you leaving?" "What?" was all I could say. "Chayagar, when are you going over to take possession?" "Mom, are you serious? That place is a dump. I have no interest in role-playing a medieval landlord in some godforsaken hamlet in the middle of nowhere. I have a career here. We have a business here." She sighed. "I wish I could have kept you here forever, but I can't. You have to go. Our family must take up the mantle. It is our duty to Chayagar, to our ancestors, to ourselves. Go." I paused. "That place killed my father. I'm not going. I'm going to write to the lawyer and... Chayagar killed your father, and it killed your grandfather." "Grandfather? How can you be so sure?" "It killed him, just as it has killed many of your ancestors before him. I know it, somewhere inside me, just as your father knew that day. He knew he was going to die. He could not keep winning, but he did his duty. Just as you will, because if you don't, Chayagar will kill many more." I leaned forward and grasped her hands in my own. "Mom, you're not telling me something. What do you know?" "Not enough. Only they can explain it to you. Those who have lived on the land and worked with it. But I know this. There was a reason your family, our family, was given that land. No, a reason they were placed upon that land. It wasn't wealth or favor or martial skill that won us Chayagar. It was something else. Something to do with them, the others. You know of what I speak." Her hands trembled in mine. "You must go." She would say no more after this, only insisting that I go, and that all will be clear once I reach the manor and take over affairs. I will be frank. After this conversation, my desire to go to Chayagar had only lessened. But right now, I am in a rattling bus, traveling through territory that I'm pretty sure does not exist on any map you have access to, on a road you will probably never see. A road that leads to Chayagar. I am here because of what happened last night. We were finalizing some pleadings for filing, so I left my chamber well after midnight. No, there was no overtime pay. The journey home was a blur, as was changing, brushing my teeth, and collapsing on the bed. My mother was already sleeping like the dead. She had long learned that staying up waiting for me was too regular of an occurrence to be healthy. The first thing I remember is waking up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat. Now, Kolkata does get hot, but not moisten the bed with sweat hot. I sleepily grabbed my phone off the bedside table and checked the time. 2 a.m. With an internal groan, I started drifting off again, but then I noticed that the crack at the bottom of my bedroom door was awash with light. That was strange. My mother never turned on the lights, even if she woke up in the middle of the night. To add to that, this light was a soft and diffuse yellow, nothing like the harsh white glare of the hallway LEDs. Hesitantly, I swung my legs off the bed, feeling for my slippers, even as I dragged the shirt over my head. Then, I softly padded over to the door and opened it. There was no longer a hallway on the other side. Instead, a dozen candles illuminated a cozy little room with bookshelves wrapping around the walls. Small wooden tables held more piles of books and papers, and a larger one had a topographical map spread out, multicolored pins poking out here and there. A few roughly bound manuscripts and diagrams were also strewn haphazardly across the floor. In the farthest corner, there was a little writing table, decorated with ornate sigils and floral designs. Somehow, my bedroom had opened onto my grandfather's study. The man himself was hunched over the writing table, scribbling absent-mindedly on parchment with a gilded pen. At this point, I was sure I was dreaming. Nevertheless, I tried to be quiet as I walked over to him, carefully stepping around the papers on the floor. Despite his age, his burly frame filled the chair, muscles bulging through the thin tunic he wore. Though he had lost tone with age, a lifetime of hard work had made him an incredibly strong man. His walking stick leaned against one of the armrests, the knotted head glinting slightly in the firelight. A rimless pair of spectacles perched at the very tip of his nose as he peered down at his writings, occasionally stopping to consult one of the many open books on the table. I slowly reached out and touched his arm. It felt solid and fleshy, real, but he did not react at all, continuing his work. Definitely a dream, then. "Babu?" The voice came from the door I had just come through. I turned to see a gaunt, fit man standing in the doorway, hands clasped at his waist. His dark hair was cropped short, and he sported a thin, well-groomed mustache. He was bare-chested and wore a faded white dhoti with a coarse cotton gamcha around his neck. I did not know this man, but I would know the attire anywhere. It was the attire of a traditional village manservant. My grandfather turned in his chair. "Yes, Banu?" The servant's eyes darted from side to side, unsure. He is here, Babu. Should I show him in? He has never come this late in the night." "The tall one?" "Yes. Should I send him away like last time? He is being insistent." "No, Banu. I was the one who invited him. Show him in." "Yes, Babu." Banu nervously twisted his gamcha before walking out. A few seconds later, a figure came through the door, bowing his head and shoulders to fit. It was clad in a long cloak that fell down from its shoulders to its feet, covering its form entirely. A broad hat covered its head, the shadow hiding its face from view as well. It slowly stalked over, keeping its head bowed to avoid touching the whitewashed ceiling, until it stood right behind my grandfather. He kept his back turned to the entity, lazily continuing his scribbling. "Thakur." My grandfather gave no response. "Thakur?" The entity's voice was thick and heavy, but still intelligible. "I agreed to see you because you were so persistent, my friend, but it is not like you to waste time looking for my attention." My grandfather paused to look at one of the books. "Speak." "Thakur, do not go today. The omens are not right. The trees are restless. The birds sing of doom. Do not go. If you came to stop me, you have come in vain. It must be tonight. You know that. The forest is not safe tonight. Even with your weapons, your men, and your rituals, success is barely possible, and you choose to go alone. I cannot risk the others for this. This is my duty to the land, my burden to bear." To punctuate his point, my grandfather stabbed his pen into the paper, leaving a large dot in the middle of the design he was drawing. "Thakur, you are brave, like your father was brave, like his father was brave, but you are also wise. Listen to me. There will be other times, other nights. Tonight, you will die. If that is what it takes." The entity rumbled, its cloak ripping as a long, whitish hand appeared. It opened its clenched fist over the table, depositing some small pebble-like things in front of my grandfather. I leaned over to see. They were human teeth, flecked with dried blood and bits of gum. I recoiled, my stomach lurching. This dream was steadily turning into something of a nightmare. It has begun its hunt. Its power waxes with the rising of the moon. If you go, you will die, and you will fail. Go tomorrow, and you will say the same thing tomorrow. Grandfather brushed the teeth into one little pile to the side, unfazed. If so, you will try the day after tomorrow, or the day after that. No, for the first time, he raised his voice. It cannot be tomorrow. If I don't go today, it will attack. It is ready. You know that. The village, my family, nothing will be safe. The entity was silent for a few seconds. Yes, it is ready, that is true. If I win, that is another curse off the land for a few centuries. If I lose, he opened one of the drawers on the table, producing a small glass vial. I can slow it down at least. Buy some time. For whom? Him? I have faith in my grandson. If anyone can figure out a way, he will. He is the next lord, after all. After my son. He paused again. I cannot lose again, but if I do, help him. I have seen the boy Thakur. He knows nothing of our ways, and he does not have time to learn. If you fail, have faith, old friend. We must have faith. In these times, we have little else. Grandfather sighed, resuming his drawing again. If there is nothing else? The entity made a deep noise that reverberated in my chest. A sigh. Then it removed its hat, revealing a smooth, white head devoid of hair or ears. It had no marks or blemishes, just a smooth, bulbous mass, at least from the back. As I looked at his bare skin, my limbs grew heavy. My head erupted in a dull migraine, and my knees knocked, threatening to buckle. A primal chill settled in the pit of my stomach. As you wish, Thakur. I will pray I see you again. If not, I will honor my promise. The young lord will be safe with me. My grandfather chuckled, despite the heavy sense of dread that was beginning to permeate the air. Pray? You? We have gods of our own, though you would not term them as such. The entity chuckled, its skin rippling like water. Good luck. It put its hat on again and slowly backed out of the room without turning its back. Even after it was out of view, the cold terror remained. With a jolt, I realized I was sweating again. Was this normal for dreams, or was this a nightmare? Did it matter? Either way, it was time to go. I slowly backed away out of the doorway and back to my bedroom. But my bedroom was no longer there. Instead, I was in our ancestral manor, the hallways dark and cold. The village did have electricity, but power was unreliable at best. That was probably why the study was lit by candles. But outside, the servants had neglected to light the many oil lamps hanging on hooks around the house. I still wanted to believe this was a dream. But the familiar chill of the midnight air, the distant smells of the land, the feel of the hard marble against my feet, and much more made that incredibly difficult to believe. My doubts were fully and finally erased when an ice-cold hand grabbed my wrist from behind. "You are far from your proper time, little lord." The hand slowly but firmly turned me around. The cloaked entity towered over me. This close, the radiating sense of dread was almost overpowering, settling into my veins like frost and chilling my blood. My heart pounded like a rabid dog, but otherwise, time refused to flow. A prickling sensation began to grow out of its grip, turning the skin dead and numb as it grew. I dared not look down at its hand, my eyes stuck on the hat covering its face. "You ought to be more careful. Not everyone will be as charitable as I when dealing with trespass of this magnitude." With its other hand, it removed its hat. Like the back of its head, its face was completely featureless, except for a mouth, a wide, grinning mouth, showing off straight white teeth. But then again, you are not here by choice, are you? You are incapable of that. For now, its mouth did not move when it spoke, the voice merely echoing in my ears. I could not even shake in fear. My muscles refused to obey me. My legs started to crumple, but his immovable grip somehow held me upright, like a puppet propped up by strings. "Either way, you must go back. Mortals cannot be stuck in time. Very harmful, even for one from your bloodline." It bent down, leaning its head forward until he was close enough to kiss. "Would you like to go back now, little lord?" My teeth were clenched so hard I was afraid they might break, but even through the haze of fear, I managed to give him a jerky nod. This close, its skin gave off the smell of rotting flesh and sickly decay. Its grin widened even further at my assent. Impossibly further, stretching around the sides of his head and around to the back until his mouth formed a continuous band around his head. "See you soon, Thakur." His head split open like a box, the top tilting back to reveal a pitch-black maw. He continued to lean, beginning to swallow me from top to bottom. My heart was trying to break through my ribcage and flee, but I was otherwise paralyzed, only watching helplessly as the darkness swallowed my vision. And then my hearing. Then my sense of smell went, and then finally all sensation disappeared as he let go of my wrist. I could only feel one thing, the dim pressure of his hands around my waist as he tilted his head back again, pushing me into his gullet. His mouth was warm and heavy, more like a weighted blanket than a body cavity. But as the top of his head sealed around my legs, all sensation returned. Just in time for the void to begin pressing in on me in undulating waves, growing needle-like teeth that stabbed and tore at my flesh. As the creature chewed, I began to scream. Then the maw closed in, crushing my bones like twigs with one final squeeze. When I woke up in my bed, the light of early morning shining outside, I was still screaming. But I was intact and mercifully unchewed. In fact, I could have passed off the whole thing as a bad dream, even when my mother burst into my room and demanded to know why I was screaming loud enough for them to hear me in Delhi. Instead, I packed 2 light suitcases, made excuses with my chamber, bid my mother goodbye, caught a cab to a bus terminus, and bought a ticket for Chayagar. Because, though no other mark from last night remains, it is very difficult to ignore the raw, red skin around my wrist, especially when it is in the shape of an abnormally large hand. The bus I am on right now is an overnight route. The vehicle is almost empty with only 5 passengers beside me. They all seem to be non-locals. Backpackers, probably. One of them appears to be European, while the others are Indian like me. The driver pays them no mind, but for some reason he keeps looking at me in the rearview mirror. He says nothing, does nothing, and does not stare for too long. But I could have sworn that at least once or twice, when I met his gaze, his eyes were dark voids, interspersed with glittering stars. Then again, getting eaten does tend to make you a little tired, so who knows what I'm seeing? I wanted to be a reasonably successful litigator. Instead, I'm now on my way to claim a Zemindari that's about 10 centuries old. I'm about to be the lord of my own little village. A village that has apparently claimed the lives of both my father and my grandfather, in the same line of work that I am expected to pursue once I get there. On top of that, there is something there that may have taken a liking to my taste and may decide to try me out in real life this time. Promise or no promise. Part 2. Perhaps I judged this place too harshly. It turns out that they have finally gotten around to getting a cell tower up here, so I do have reception. Typically, it's extremely spotty, but hey, at least it's there. I am going to write and put up these posts as and when I have the time, so don't try and measure the gaps between them to create a timeline. It won't work. Anyway, I should probably start from where I left off last time. By the time the bus was pulling into Chayagar, I was the only passenger left. No, some horrible monstrosity did not attack us and kill them off. They just got down at their own stops like usual. You must understand that people from the outside can and do visit our village. It's just incredibly difficult. It does not appear on any official map. No travel guides about it exist anywhere. The only symbol of the Indian government in the entire area is the police station, and it's completely staffed by local officers. I'm pretty sure the district superintendent doesn't even know it exists. If you try to catch transport from any of the major cities, no one is going to know where it is. Pretty much the only way to get here is to ask for directions in some of the neighboring villages. Some of the people there, especially the old ones, may be able to guide you to the right buses and roads. Curiously, people who have visited once never have any trouble finding their way back again. But most never do. It's a pretty boring place. If you do manage to find your way here, you'll be greeted by the same rusty iron board that I saw, scrawled over with barely legible writing in English, Hindi, and Bengali, right before the bus dumps you in front of the two naked concrete pillars that qualify as the village stop. Dear visitors, Chayagar is more dangerous than it appears. Do not speak to strange people. Do not go to the forest. Do not leave your dwelling at night. If you see anything strange, inform the police station immediately. We are glad to have you as our guests. Chayagar Gram Panchayat. Wonderful. Given that I was as much of a stranger here as the occasional German vlogger who stumbled in. Instead of driving off after fetching my suitcases from the luggage carrier overhead, the bus driver parked his vehicle off to the side and casually ambled over to the small tin and wood tea shop, helpfully placed immediately across the road from the stop. Standing on the outskirts, I realized my predicament too late. In my rush to get here, I had forgotten to call ahead on the landline. The family had no idea I was here. Therefore, I had no transport to the manor. On top of that, it was the zenith of noon, and the sweltering road threatened to melt my shoes. Having little other choice, I slowly followed the driver to the welcoming shade of the shop. The front had been extended into a corrugated tin awning, with several wooden benches underneath, forming a makeshift seating area. Here, the both of us almost unconsciously settled in next to each other. The driver raised a finger to the old man manning the shop, who quickly brought over an earthen cup brimming with milk tea and 2 cheap biscuits. And for you, Babu, it was too hot for tea, so I asked him if he had water. He did, and I ate 2 extremely dry biscuits of my own between gulps. People don't come here often, to this village, especially not from the city. The driver's voice was level and rich, unnaturally posh for someone with his rough, everyman appearance. I paused before deciding to ignore it. There had been enough strangeness already. No, I suppose they don't. I took another sip of the water. He looked at me for a good few seconds, over the rim of his cup, and I could have sworn I saw stars dimly twinkling in them again. Tourist? Or are you some sort of salesman? Neither. Just some family business. No way he needed to know more than that. In the first place, it was odd to have to strike up a conversation with your bus driver. They were supposed to be liminal beings, taking you where you needed to go and then disappearing. This just felt wrong, like seeing your middle school teacher at the mall. I see. Family is good. One must take care of their family. The driver nodded solemnly, finishing his tea and smashing the cup on the ground. Do you smoke? No thanks. I don't either. He glared straight into my eyes again, pupils expanding until I was looking into dark abysses. I like quick deaths, Slow ones are boring. The air turned heavy and brittle, like something was about to happen. His eyes seemed to swirl like whirlpools as I looked into them. The effect was almost hypnotizing. A strange, dull cold began to deaden the tips of my fingers, slowly radiating upward into my palms and then my arms. My eyelids grew heavy and drowsy. All I wanted was to go to sleep, but I was startled out of my stupor by a loud clang. The shopkeeper had placed the kettle a little too roughly on the stove. When I glanced back, the driver's eyes were back to normal. He sighed and got to his feet, walking around under the shade to stretch his legs. It took a while to find my voice again. Don't you need to, go back? No, not yet. The route timings are very spaced out. I spend a few hours here every time. He nodded at the back of the shop, where a small ramshackle shed was leaning against the wall. He lets me sleep in there sometimes. Are you a local? No, but I visit often. He looked over to where his bus was parked. Obviously. Right. I had very little interest in continuing this conversation, especially given what had just happened. Instead, I gulped down the last of the water and began looking around for a bin to throw the bottle in. The shopkeeper waved me over. Give me the bottle, Babu. He tossed it into a green plastic bag behind him. I send them for recycling with the bus every night. It's good money, though he keeps some of it. I see. Would you like some tea now? I put on a fresh kettle. Oh no, not for me. Thanks. Then he leaned in conspiratorially and asked me the fateful question that every outsider must face in any village in India. Kiski yahase hai aap? Whose house are you from? Well, what he was really asking is how I knew people here. In other words, my family. Also, he spoke in Hindi, so he was not a Bengali. That did not surprise me. There are plenty of people from other states here, mostly migrants in search of jobs. Ramlal, our manservant, was from Bihar, though his ancestors had moved to Chayagar a long time ago. Birendra Thakur, I answered, using my grandfather's formal name. As soon as he heard this, the shopkeeper, who must have been at least 20 years older than me, jumped out from behind the shop and bent to touch my feet. I recoiled instinctively, practically jumping backwards to stop him. He looked up at me, still squatting on the ground. Thakur, the little Thakur, how you have grown. It has been so long since you last came to the village. I grabbed his shoulders and practically hoisted him to his feet. Please get up and don't touch my feet. I'm practically your son. Oh yeah, I should probably mention this. Like all good feudal lords, the men in our family are given two names, a personal name at birth and a formal name at puberty. Yes, I also have one. No, I won't be revealing it. Not yet, anyway. Also, Thakur is just an honorific we use, like lord. It's more common than you think. Rabindranath Tagore, the poet guy? Tagore is just a bastardized spelling of Thakur. After hesitating, he opted to merely fold his hands together. Thakur, I have seen you when you were a boy. You used to buy sweets from my shop whenever you visited. Maybe that was true. I barely remember my trips here. You don't need to call me that. After your grandfather passed, he touched his head in a reverent gesture. Birendra Thakur treated us like his own children. We heard about your father too. The gods have given you much grief, but the village is yours now, Thakur. Now that you are here, everything will be all right. He paused. But why are you here? You need to go to the manor. One Vakil Babu came to the village a few days ago, and I heard he was waiting for you. I nodded. Yeah, I'm just looking for a way there. Is there an autorickshaw or something I can take? A few farmers pass by here. But you cannot travel by bullock cart, Thakur. It's unthinkable. I raised my hands to placate him. The change in demeanor was threatening to give me a whiplash injury. I'll manage. Nonsense. He turned to the back of the shop and shouted, Ramu, come here. A young, well-built man came jogging around the back of the building. After a brief introduction, during which he also promptly tried to fall at my feet, Ramu pulled his trusty bike out of the shed, and we set off for the house. Ramu was the shopkeeper's son, and about a year younger than me. He worked with his father in the shop, and during harvest season, he helped in the fields. Like his father, he also had a deep, totally unearned reverence for me, refusing to call me by my name even when I told it to him. Soon, we had passed the bordering fields and entered the village proper. The outermost houses were hasty constructions of thatch and mud, but as we came closer to the center, They changed into more permanent constructions of stone, bricks, and mortar. We also passed the small village clinic, the primary school, and the panchayat office, which was tightly locked up in what should have been prime working hours. Typical. I didn't realize they had started selling motorcycles in the village, Ramu. Chayagar really is moving forward, I started, trying to make the conversation less formal. No, Thakur. The motorcycle is not from here. I bought it in the town about 2 years ago. You don't go to town often? No, Thakur. Too much work. Besides, people from our village seldom find the outside world attractive. You don't need to call me that, Ramu. We're the same age. The Thakur is the Thakur. Before I could say anything else, he braked abruptly, almost toppling the bike as he struggled to regain his balance. On the road, a knot of about 10 people stood facing us, blocking the way forward. They looked completely ordinary, clad in simply colored tunics and trousers, with gentle smiles on their faces. Completely normal, that is, except for the fact that they were standing entirely, unnaturally still, only staring and smiling. Dread settled in the pit of my stomach as I realized that they all had their eyes fixed directly on me. Ramu got off the bike, motioning for me to stay put as he warily put themselves between me and them. Who are you? I haven't seen you in the village before. Not a problem, one of the men said in an even tone, still smiling gently. Why have you blocked the road? Let us through. Not a problem, the man repeated in the exact same tone. A sense of wrongness began to itch at the back of my mind. Upon closer inspection, their expressions were perfectly frozen and still, with not the slightest hint of variation, like a mask more than a face. Ramu must have felt it too, because he grimaced and backed away, hand moving to one of his pockets. This is fine. This time it was a woman who said it, in the same even tone, with the exact same smile. Move aside, Ramu warned again. This is the Thakur. Make way for him. Almost as a response, they began to move, practically gliding as they closed the distance between us in a fly. So good to see you again, one of the men said, as they all raised their hands in unison, preparing to tackle Ramu. Moving quicker than I could have anticipated, Ramu pulled a switchblade out of his pocket, snapping it open as he stabbed the first one in the belly. Instead of blood, fine ash poured out of the wound. Not a problem, the man repeated, even as the wound grew, and he crumbled to ash in a matter of seconds. But then, the rest were upon him. Thakur, run! Ramu kicked one of the creatures, hurling her backwards. 2 others tried to grab at his arm and take away the knife, but he swatted them away. Run! The manor is that way. Not far now. Run. To its credit, my body moved before my mind could even comprehend what was happening. I swung my leg off the bike and began to move. However, the creatures, whatever they were still blocking the road. Around them, then. I ducked into one of the alleys, intending to go between the buildings and sidestep them entirely. But this was exactly what they had been waiting for. As I ran, a smiling woman turned the corner and grabbed my shoulders. Despite my momentum, I stopped dead in my tracks. You're a good man, she said, before pushing me with one hand. My feet left the ground, and I landed on my back, sliding all the way out of the alley and back onto the main road. My head spun from the blow of the fall, my vision threatening to split into multiples. They had caught Ramu. His knife had been knocked out of his hands, landing somewhat close to me. He was now prone on the ground, 2 of the smiling men holding his arms down. His legs were free for some time, kicking wildly at the creatures surrounding him, but they soon managed to pin him down completely. The woman from earlier slowly knelt over him, straddling him as he struggled and cursed. This is fine, she repeated, leaning down until her face was exactly aligned with his. Then her features began to melt, like cheap paint. Everything on her face, her eyes, lips, nose, lashes, all began to bleed and blend into each other. The concoction rotated in lazy circles, slowly bleaching until the entirety of her face had become a gray, ashy spiral, akin to a cyclone or a whirlpool. This is fine. The voice echoed from the depths of the spiraling ash, muffled and dreamy. Ramu stopped struggling, his eyes widening as the reality of the danger set in. Then she leaned in again, and he began to scream. The woman's face spun faster, almost greedily, as Ramu's face began to dissolve into particles. Blood emerged, pooled, and ran in rivulets down the side of his head as the skin was disintegrated, cracked, and peeled off, disappearing into the gaping maw. His eyes wrinkled and then burst, the fluid within similarly swallowed. His limbs thrashed wildly, the freshly lipless mouth screaming in impotent terror, but the grip of his captors would not yield. Looking back now, the whole thing probably lasted about 10 seconds at best. But as I lay there, dazed, my hands unwilling to rise and cover my eyes, my gut unable to vomit at the sight, those seconds stretched into hours. Too late, I realized that I knew all the smiling faces surrounding us. The English teacher from middle school I had a crush on, the friendly local grocer from my neighborhood in Kolkata, the serious constable who sat outside the Calcutta High Court on Wednesdays, that one girl in college I tried to flirt with and failed miserably. These things were never people at all. They were simply pretending, and they were pretending to be people I knew, like an anglerfish and its light. I should have seen it before. Ramu's struggles stopped, the final signs of life ebbing from him, alongside the last few particles of his face. The skinless, bloody mess of muscle and fat left behind made my skin crawl, but I barely had time to process it as the woman's face slowly returned to normal human features. But though the body remained female, the face was now Ramu's. Except he was no longer screaming. The same serene smile had been painted onto his mouth. "Run, Thakur, run, Thakur," he chanted in that same even tone. A movement at my feet caught my eye. The creature that had pushed me was now bending over me, her face dissolving into the same spiral. "You're a good man." How typical that the monsters would pick the one girl I fumbled to steal my face. However, the humor was lost on me in the moment. Instead, I forced my limbs to work, reaching up to push her away. She casually grabbed my arm with unnatural strength, pinning it to the road as her spiraling face loomed over mine. The others slowly rose, leaving Ramu's lifeless corpse behind as they surrounded me in a loose circle. The thin smiles remained affixed on their faces as they watched my impending death. I desperately scrabbled for purchase, turning my head away from her. But she used her other hand to grab my chin, almost lovingly turning my face to meet hers as she leaned in. Closer and closer. I could not stop the tremors from running through my limbs, but otherwise, everything important refused to move. Like a deer dazed by headlights, I had found my doom, and I could do nothing to even slow it. The edges of my face erupted in pain as the skin pulled and snapped, folding in on itself. My fingers found something hard and well-shaped. The knife. The entities had not noticed, too focused on my face. I scratched desperately, nails catching in the most minute grooves on the handle as I pulled it into my grip. My nose began to be flayed, the skin reaching up to be sucked into the spiral. I turned the knife inwards and stabbed it into her wrist. An unearthly shriek emanated from the churning whirlpool, and she jerked backwards, snatching her hand away. Taking the opening, before I could know what I was doing, I reached up and dragged the knife across her throat. The blade was incredibly sharp, almost scalpel-like as it tore straight through her skin and flesh, opening an ashy torrent that cascaded down her chest and onto mine. The creature raised her hands, trying to stem the flow, but it was only a second or two before she collapsed completely, crumbling into nothingness. For a moment, everything was still. Then, all the remaining ones surged forward. I slashed the knife blindly through the air, freed of my paralysis by sheer adrenaline as I kicked away from them. Anything to put a little distance. Make the smallest opening. The bike was close, the engine still running. Maybe I could get away. Two of them grabbed my feet and heaved, effortlessly pulling me into the knot. The next moment, I was set upon by a torrent of hands, pinning my limbs. The knife was slapped out of my hands. Bad boy," my English teacher murmured, her face already beginning to twist as she approached me. An identity is a heck of a thing to take from someone, you know, especially for free. They all froze, heads snapping unnaturally to stare at the source of the familiar posh voice behind me. Their grip slackened, allowing me to turn slightly to see the bus driver casually sipping another cup of tea, the other hand in his pocket. "I am not very fond of thieves." He looked right at me. "All right, kid? Your face looks a little stretchy, but I think you will live." I looked back at the creatures. For the first time, they were not smiling. Their faces were stuck in the exact same grimace, eyes glowering with anger. "Interloper, devil, exile, do not interfere." They spoke in unison, the tone harsh and rough. Do not interfere. Sorry, guys, needs must. He poured the tea out on the ground, making 3 straight lines. He cannot die yet. The heir has not been produced. Interloper, they screamed. Die, die, die. If you insist. He crushed the cup in his hand and tossed the fragments into the air. The 3 lines of tea on the road glowed and then detonated in a blinding blast, searing my retinas. I screwed my eyes shut until the after-image of the explosion faded from the inside of my eyelids. When I opened them again, the man was standing over me. He offered me his hand. They were right. You truly are an amateur. I accepted his help, unsteadily rising. Who are you? I drive the bus. We have met before, have we not? This linear time is rather confusing. What? No. Who are you? Really? Now that is a good question. He tapped his nose. There was no answer to follow. What were those things? I panted as the memory of Ramu's face peeling off came rushing back. I deliberately turned my back to the body. Opportunists. Your grandfather left a vacuum, and they intended to fill it. They will not be the only ones. You need to take charge of affairs, quickly. He pointed down the road. Manor is not far, but avoid the road. They will be watching. Won't you? Help you? Escort you? Babysit you? He let out a harsh but melodious laugh. I have already done too much, helping you like this. Any more, and there will be consequences. I frowned. Consequences? You can stay here for some time. I have made the place safe, temporarily. But you must get moving soon. He waved lazily and turned, walking away. If you need something from town, let me know. No extra charge for the boss. Wait, I called out, despite the sense of unease. What did you mean? About the heir. What are you planning? The same thing everyone has been telling you already. He turned his head one last time, and I saw the stars glitter in the inky darkness of his eyes. There has always been a Thakur. There must always be a Thakur. Then, the darkness bloomed from his eyes, enveloping my vision entirely for an instant. When it snapped out of existence, he was gone. I am typing this out on the road, right next to Ramu's faceless corpse. But I'll probably only get to post it after I actually get to the house. I'm still trying not to look at the body. No villager has arrived on the scene yet. They must all be busy in the fields or at work. The bus driver, I suppose I cannot call him that any longer. The man with the starry eyes? Too long. Anyway, he said this place would be safe for some time, but that provides little comfort now to my shaking hands. I have made an astounding number of spelling mistakes already. Every time I look away from the screen, I see that ashy, gray spiral burned into my vision. Chayagar, meet the family. And the monster. I've decided to clean up the titles a bit and formalize them so people can keep track of these posts better. Nothing doing about the previous entries. I'm not sure even an entire estate's worth of money can convince the Reddit overlords to allow us to edit titles. Also, a lot is happening here. A lot. I'll write stuff up as and when I can, but these installments are going to get a little spaced out. On the brighter side, as long as I'm writing, I'm still alive. It was a while until I mustered up the courage to leave the encounter site with the spirals. Yes, I've decided to call those things spirals on account of the, spiral faces. The Star Eyes driver guy had given me zero idea as to how long his protection would last. But when my skin began to crawl with the unmistakable sense of a predator watching me, I figured it was time to grab my luggage and go. Taking his advice, I got off the roads and ducked into the alleys, weaving in and out occasionally as some paths ran into dead ends or particularly aggressive-looking cows. I did not initially think I would actually be able to navigate the village properly, given that I was literally a child the last time I saw it. But some sort of deep-seated subconscious memories must have resurfaced, because the dense, semi-urban sprawl soon began to dissolve back into large fields and imposing farmhouses. Unlike the fields at the edge of the settlement, these belonged to the richer farmers, and were much better kept and maintained. That meant I was getting closer to the manor, because these were estate lands that had been leased out for farming. A paved stone road ran straight through the fields and towards the house, but there was no way to be certain that this section was not also included in the avoid roads tidbit. Instead, I opted to trample through the fields. I regretted that decision as soon as my foot touched the soil. The fields had been watered recently, turning them into a sopping, muddy mess that clung to my shoes and then my legs as I painstakingly trudged my way through. Some places looked dry, promising safety, but were, in actuality, congealed lumps of sludge that definitely did not send me skidding and face-planting into the ground more than a couple of times. Mercifully, however, no massive mud monster or living tendrils of paddy rose up to attack me again. Mr. Starr seemed to have been right. Whatever wanted to kill me had not counted on me going off the beaten path. No, I haven't settled on a name for the guy yet. Please help me pick. Soon I could see the manor house looming in the distance, which meant that the estate boundaries were not far. Given that I was almost at my destination, I decided that it was safe to return to the convenience of the approach road before I had a few more close encounters with dirt. It was then that I encountered my first villager. Well, the first after my ride got eaten. Imagine, if you can, gentle reader, that you are walking down the street near your house in the middle of the day, going pleasantly about your business. Then, a disheveled man comes clambering out of the corner of your vision, caked in mud and lugging 2 dirty suitcases, armed with a knife jammed hastily into his pocket, sporting a 1,000-yard stare and an irritated scowl. Then he locks eyes with you and begins sprinting in your direction. Some of you may be braver than I am, but as for me, I would very much prefer to be wearing brown pants at the time. As such, I could not truly blame the poor farmer for taking one look at me, clutching his lungi in his hands, and running full tilt in the opposite direction. To add to his woes, he was running in the direction of the estate, so I had little choice but to pursue him. In hindsight, my loud shouts to slow down, accompanied by wild gesticulation, may have done nothing to alleviate his fear. It took no more than another minute or two of running and shouting before the road bent slightly downwards, sloping towards the estate's hefty stone boundary wall. The cobbled road continued through the boundary and into our private lands beyond, but the way was barred by a massive iron gate guarded by 2 bare-chested guards with thick lathis. The farmer ran straight to one of them and grabbed his arm, pointing wildly at my demonic form, galloping close behind. The sun at my back casting a suitably fearsome silhouette. The 2 of them looked at me, looked at each other, and quickly raised their sticks, brandishing them warily as they approached me. The villager cowered behind their bulk for protection. Sensing that I was about 2 seconds away from getting my dome cracked, I slowed to a walk, holding up my hands and the luggage in them in a placating gesture. As they got closer, they must have noticed that I was at least human because their gaze slightly softened. Slightly. One of the men jerked his head up in the universal gesture. "What do you want?" I wiped some of the sweat and dust off my face, hoping it would help my case. Wait, I'm just here to meet the lawyer." "What lawyer?" one of them barked. "The estate lawyer, the one that dropped in a few days ago. Look, I'm Rajendra Thakur's son, Virendra Thakur's grandson. Apparently, I've sort of inherited this place now, so just calm down, okay? Don't hit me." It wasn't the best speech in history, but this did seem to give the guards some pause. They hesitantly lowered their lethis. "Rajendra Babu's son? Why should we believe you?" "Hold on." I knelt on the ground, opening one of the suitcases and extracting the inheritance letter. "Here you go." One of the guards took the envelope and pulled out the letter. "This is in English. I can't read it." The other one, older, with a few graying hairs, slowly came closer and squinted at my face. "Wait, it's him! It's really him!" "Are you sure?" Yes, I remember his face, though it has been so long. The young master, the Chote Thakur, is here." He dropped his lathi and folded his hands together. "Forgive us, my lord, we could not recognize you like this." The other guard decided to trust him and folded his hands as well, bowing slightly. "Thakur, why are you covered in mud? Did something happen?" "Oh, never mind that. He obviously ran into trouble on the way." The older one waved at him dismissively, practically chasing him off. "Go to the house, inform the family, bring the palanquin." I raised a hand. "No palanquin. Thank you. I'll walk." "He'll walk. Why didn't you inform us you were coming, Thakur? We could have escorted you here." He leaned in a little. "The village is not safe nowadays." I touched the edges of my face where the skin was still dry and torn. "I'm aware. About that, there's a dead body. Near the panchayat office, we were attacked." I expected some kind of reaction, but he only nodded solemnly. Who? Ramu, the shopkeeper's son. He nodded again before turning to the other guard. You're still here? Go. As he ran off, the farmer slowly came out of hiding, bowing. Thakur, I could not recognize you. Otherwise, I would never have run. I stopped him before he could touch my feet. This seemed to be becoming a pattern. I understand. I should have helped you. I should have seen who it was. He folded his hands. There are strange people roaming around nowadays. Strange things too, not the ones we are used to. Others. I just did not want to die. I have a family. Strange things? The family will explain all, Thakur. The guard motioned to the gate. Please come with me. It is not safe outside the walls. And you, go to the village and alert the others. Tell Ramu's father too. We need to recover the body. Yes, sir. The farmer bowed again and ran off. Come with me, Thakur. As he took us through the gate, I noticed for the first time that the metal had been engraved with minute designs and writing. The wall was also similarly painted over with a variety of icons and pictures, some of which I recognized as religious. Most of them, however, held no meaning for me. There were also a variety of charms and trinkets hanging from ropes at regular intervals, but I barely had time to inspect them before I was ushered through to the other side. Beyond the gate, the open fields fell away to a garden running along the inside of the wall. No, not a manicured lawn and flower beds kind of garden. A real garden, shadowy and tastefully overgrown. The road broke into a number of meandering paths, lit by open torches every few paces. Trees and shrubbery rose overhead, carefully curated into an intertwining canopy that provided shade on hot afternoons like this one. Flowers, weeds, creepers, and herbs all tangled with each other in the undergrowth, creating a dense carpet that seethed with constant movement from critters. Here and there, mushrooms poked through the green. Despite the look of abandonment, it was obviously maintained, given the number of freshly used gardening tools and watering cans. I can only assume it is an aesthetic choice of the family. As for me, I was too busy wondering if something would jump out of the darkness and try to eat my face again. A wrought iron fence marked the edge of the garden, and through its gates, the rest of the estate could be accessed. The family property was truly massive, now that I looked at it through the eyes of an adult. Sheds and buildings of every description, vegetable gardens and orchards, lakes and ponds with fishing piers and stone waterfronts, statues and sculptures, shrines and grottos, and cobbled roads running in every direction through clipped meadows. As a child, I had barely left the manor proper, and only with my mother on short errands. I had not had time to appreciate just how unwieldy the place was, or just how many people it took to keep it in shape. Now my eyes watered just thinking of the costs that I would have to bear. Thakur, shall I call ahead to the house and get a car for you, or would you prefer a horse? Our stables still have a few riding stallions. The guard looked absolutely sincere. A horse? I stuttered. No, that's fine. The house is not too far, right? No, sir, not very far. It is right in the center of the property. I elected to walk. To be honest, despite all the kowtowing, I still felt like an outsider here. I had never even seen a map of this place, much less known or managed it. What had my grandfather been thinking, leaving it to me? Yes, I know, there must always be a lord. Whatever. But why me? My uncles had all lived on the property forever. They knew it inside and out. Hell, why not my grandmother? She was still alive. Instead, now the entire family had to deal with a city hotshot showing up and ordering them around. I would not make it worse by asking for a horse. Thankfully, I was a fast walker. It wasn't long before the boundary walls of the house itself came into view. These were not as thick as the estates, but still pretty hefty, standing almost 10 feet tall and similarly festooned with drawings and trinkets. Beyond the gate was the front courtyard of the house. There were people waiting for me. As I slinked through, my grandmother was the first to move, running up and grabbing my face with both hands. He is here. Finally, my grandson is here. She laughed, kissing my face all over. How long has it been? Years. I tried to smile, despite the circumstances. I heard about Grandpa. How are you holding up? Years? More like a decade. My eldest uncle sauntered up, his usual easy grin, just a little more strained than usual. What's wrong? The Thakur is too proud to ask for our blessings now? Nice to see you too. I tried to smile, bending down and touching my grandmother's feet. Live long, live long. She grabbed my shoulders. Oh, finally, the prodigal son has returned home. Everything will be all right now. Ma'am, should I? The guard called. What? Yes, yes. Go back to the gate. Don't want to let any of those characters in from outside. She turned back and called into the house. Banu, come here, quickly. A manservant came rushing in through the doorway. I recognized him from the vision. He had the same neat mustache and the same coarse gamcha. He twisted it nervously again, staring at me and my grandmother. BBG. Banu, this is Biren's grandson. He will be the new Babu. She turned to me. You remember Ramlal, the manservant? Banu is his son. Oh? I raised an eyebrow. What happened to Ramlal? He got old, so your grandfather let him retire, my uncle said. He lives in the village now. Banu lives in a house on the estate. Banu, my grandmother gestured at the bags. Take these to his room now and prepare some water. Look at him. He's filthy. He will take a bath. Yes, what happened to you? My uncle asked. Were you wrestling? Something like that. I filled them in on what had occurred. My grandmother covered her mouth. Ramu? Oh, he was such a sweet boy. Came here every few days to give us a hand. My uncle had a different concern, grimacing. Those things, huh? They're new. We haven't had them in the village before. They showed up with those strange people. Strange people? Everyone had been talking about these strange people. Never mind that now. Grandma grabbed my arm. The poor boy just got here, and he already had such a scary experience. Don't worry, darling. The estate is safe from those things. Just relax, take a bath, have lunch, get accustomed. Work can wait. She waved at Banu again, who silently picked up the suitcases and disappeared into the house. My uncle nodded. I agree. I'll fill you in later. Once you've rested up, you'll also need to talk to that lawyer bloke. He's been staying here with all this for a few days. Don't worry, he's been working with us for a while now. He can handle himself. I'll ask him to see you in the study this evening. Come now. My grandmother led me away from the conversation and into the house. The stone and marble interiors were cool and comfortable, opening onto a minimally decorated sitting room. Stairs to the right led upwards to the outer rooms, while a short hall in the back opened onto the inner courtyard and living spaces. I hope you don't mind that I didn't put you in the master bedroom, darling. Your grandfather and I have been living there for so many years. The memories, I just couldn't bear to give it up. Her lip trembled a little. I covered her hand with my own. Take as long as you need, Grandma. I'm one man, anyway. What would I even do with that cavernous thing? Thank you, dear. She smiled up me again, before pointing down one of the hallways. That is the way to your grandfather's study. Do you remember how you used to tease him, sneaking in whenever you could? He always used to chase you out, but you did it anyway. As I looked at where she was pointing, my blood froze in my veins. Though it was markedly brighter in the daylight, it was the same exact hallway I had seen in my vision, down to the last-minute details, like the displays and trinkets on the cabinets or the paintings on the walls. This, more than anything else, drove the point home. What I saw had not been a dream. Somehow, I had come here that night. The night my grandfather died. And there, waiting in the same exact spot as last time, was the tall man in the cloak, his broad-brimmed hat tilted down to cover his face. He stood as still as a statue, only his head turning smoothly to face me as my grandmother led me towards the stairs to the bedrooms. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead, and my muscles began to seize and freeze up. Last time, I had chalked it up to surprise, but it was unmistakable now. This was not just normal fear, though he was plenty scary on his own. Somehow, the man radiated an aura of pure terror and dread. It was like looking at your own brutal death, played 1,000-fold in your mind's eye. My grandmother must have noticed my faltering gait because she looked up again with concern. Are you all right? Did you hurt yourself badly? What? I forced myself to look away, though the acrid feeling of death continued to press into my nape. No, I'm fine. What were you looking at? Nothing. I looked back, though my teeth were beginning to chatter. He was still standing there, looking straight at me, waiting. Just reminiscing, I suppose. Grandma, would you mind if I explored a little, on my own? Just wanted to see how much everything has changed. She hesitated for a moment, before smiling lightly. Of course. This is your house now, dear. Go wherever you please, but stick to the renovated wing, please. The old wings are dangerous. They can collapse at any time, or you may see something you shouldn't have. I glanced back at the looming creature. Yeah, I think I had the last one covered already. Of course. Thanks, Grandma, for making me feel welcome, even after everything. She caressed my face again. Your grandfather loved you more than anything else in the world, and so do I. Though it took his own death to do it, he would have been happy to see you here, back in your element, where you belong. Are you doing all right? I asked again. How did you find out? She sighed, looking at the floor. Sorry, I shouldn't have asked. No, you should know. One night, he went off into the forest, alone. Wouldn't take a Lathiel, wouldn't take the hounds or the trackers, not even a villager. Just him, his gun, and his bag of tricks, mumbling something about having to do something. He never made himself clear to anyone. He did not return that night, or the day after. It was only after a week that his corpse appeared at the edge of the forest. She used her sari to cover her face, eyes welling with tears. One of the servants found him there. It was horrible. They wouldn't let me see him, but your uncles told me he had been eaten. Very little was left. I'm so sorry, Grandma. I put my arm around her. She sniffled, trying to smile again. It's fine. He always told me that he would never peacefully in bed. His family did not have that luxury. He had been telling me since the day we were married. The Thakurs of Chayagar have, almost to a man, died before their time, and died badly. They did what was necessary anyway. I'm sure you will too. But try to avoid the dying part, please. My heart cannot take it again. Not after your father. I'll do my best. I had to say that, though I have no idea how I'm going to keep that promise. She kissed my forehead. Your bedroom is upstairs. Banu will have put your luggage in there. Don't take too long. Lunch should be almost ready. I waited until she was out of earshot. Then I slowly turned, my legs threatening to shut down again, and made my way over to the cloaked figure. He did not remove his hat this time, but as I got close, I could see his smile under the brim. Waiting for something to happen, little lord? The garbled voice hit my mind like a sledgehammer, blunt and heavy. Are you going to eat me again? Yes, I know. Stupid thing to ask. But you try stringing together a sentence when standing before a faceless man who has cannibalized you once before, and tell me how it goes. No. You are where you should be. I do hope it did not hurt too much. I chewed gently. Right. I tried to force myself to remain calm, mentally grounding my feet to avoid toppling over. You were attacked. I was. The things I saw, that day, that night, that really happened, didn't it? It was that night. The night the Thukwar died. The voice rumbled a little deeper at that statement, almost as if it was pained. You promised you would help me, so help me. How do I get out of this? I promised I would help you, and I will, in what way I can. But I cannot tell you too much. It would attract attention. There are things on this land even I am powerless against, and that includes what hunts you. Is it the spirals? No. He seemed to know of what I spoke, despite me never sharing my nickname with him. My guess was he did not exactly listen to my words. He listened to something else. They are symptoms, not the cause. Well, what is the cause? I blurted out, despite the feeling of doom settling heavily into my chest. I remember you being much more helpful with my grandfather. The man paused, and then reached up and removed his hat, letting me gaze upon his bulbous white head. The feeling of fear grew overpowering, and my knees finally gave up. I toppled, somehow managing to land into a kneeling posture. All the while, my eyes remained locked on the spot where his should have been. Little Lord, in our world, a world that is soon to be yours as well, help is never just help. It is an expression of support and of allegiance. I thought you would have learned that with what the ferryman told you, but evidently not. I helped your grandfather because he was your grandfather. He commanded their respect, and when he could not, he commanded their fear. I gave him my help, my alliance, my allegiance, because his, in turn, could protect me. You cannot protect me. He took a step closer, bending to loom over me. As he got closer, his aura gained weight, pressing down on me like a boulder. You are weak, ignorant, and inexperienced. If not for my promise, I would have killed you myself, the moment you set foot upon this land. We cannot have a weak lord. For all your incompetence, you have great power and greater potential to harm. Your grandfather knew that. That is why he did his best to smooth your way. Personally, I would not have bothered. Better no lord than a useless one. The weight was oppressive now, driving me almost prone. Yet my eyes would not leave that one spot, rooted in place by some unseen force. A few seconds later, the presence withdrew, as the man stood straight again. His hand emerged from his cloak once more, replacing the hat. Speak softly here, little lord. Anger is in my nature, and of many others of my ilk. We are quick to it, but most cannot control it as well as I do. He paused for a moment. Seek the servant. Banu? I managed to stammer, though my throat was drier than a desert, threatening to collapse in on itself. The old servant, your grandfather's faithful. Seek him. He may help you. Like a badly edited video transition, he began to sink into the floor. That is all I may say. Already, I feel its eye upon me. Ramlal, he meant Ramlal. I managed to bring my legs under me, finally tottering to my feet. I wish you luck. Though I have no faith in you, the Tukwar did. For his sake, you must succeed. Only his head remained above ground. Be careful. Trust no wall or border. Nowhere is safe from him. Him? Not it. In hindsight, I probably shouldn't have asked that question. His head popped like a blister, spraying black sludge over my shoes and the carpet. That, too, dissolved within a second. He was gone. Did he die? Did the thing he was talking about kill him because he revealed too much? Or was that merely the way he pieced out of conversations he didn't like? Once his presence disappeared, I was able to move freely once more. Going to the bedroom and unpacking was a daze, as was taking a bath in the well-fitted bathroom and descending for lunch. Even as I inhaled my grandmother's excellent cooking, my mind was spinning with these questions and many more. I'm going to take a short nap after I finish writing this. Wrestling with supernatural entities is pretty tiring even without the heavy food. I'll need my wits about me when I take the handover from the estate lawyer, and what better way for a Bengali to relax than an afternoon siesta? The tall man said nowhere was safe, but so far, nothing has materialized on the estate. Just in case, I've been keeping Ramu's knife within arm's reach. I don't know if the spirals were just weak to weapons in general or if the knife had some special properties, but I'm not taking any chances. I now have two possible leads, the items my grandfather left me and Ram Lal. Either way, that's a problem for future me. Banu just came by and gave me a gold-plated set of toiletries. Apparently they just have that lying around. This place constantly seems to promise wealth and power, both of which, according to all evidence so far, I am far from deserving of. But for better or for worse, my grandfather thought it should be mine. They always say not to argue with one's elders, but still, I can already feel something shifting inside me, like roots reaching into my core, anchoring me to the earth. I can't explain how, but I know, somehow the land is claiming me. It hugs me to its bosom and won't let go. Like a stone, it is planting a truth deep in my belly. I belong here. If I don't leave now, I may never leave at all. Not really. And if that happens, one way or another, I will die here. But if I leave, it's clear that something is going to go horribly wrong here. The signs are clear. I can taste it in the air, like an insurance lawyer can hear sirens all the way on the other side of the city. Chayagar is overdue for a disaster. What do you guys think? Should I go back to the city while there's still a chance, or do I stand and fight?